Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you are watching What If Kid Naruto unleashed Kyuubi to protect Hinata. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
A few people were huddled into a narrow gap between some buildings in a less visited area of the village, where only the shady characters dared to live. Today was a day of celebration rather than just another ordinary day. Everyone would come together for the festival and commemorate the fourth Hokage's spectacular triumph over the demon fox on this day of remembrance, but for one individual, it was a day filled with regret and fear. He was turning 13 today. You see, there were no gifts, no friends, and no celebration. He would be fighting for his life today, just like he does every year on this day, but this time, unlike most years, he was probably going to lose. The neighborhood was filled with cries of agony as people laughed at the reactions they were evoking. One man declared triumphantly, "He will not live this year. The plague that has plagued this village will finally die this day." Another man kicked the young boy's left knee and remarked, "I say we make him suffer first for all the pain he has caused. He killed too many people last time. They deserve to be avenged." There was another booming scream, and then a loud snap. He grabbed the young boy by the throat and said, "Scream all you like, demon brat. No one will save you this year." He knew the boy was unable to stand due to his broken legs. He swiftly pulled his arm back and slammed it into the boy's stomach, causing him to lose consciousness. The only thing he could do was gasp for the precious breath of life that had decided to leave him, so there was no chance that he would scream. Naruto fell back into a heap on the ground. His kneecaps were broken, and one of his arms was broken in multiple places, making it impossible for him to move. The only thing that filled him was the purest kind of pain, and he felt like nothing more than a heap of broken flesh. He would have fainted long ago from the pain if it weren't for the demon fox inside of him. At last, his mind began to drift into unconsciousness due to the unbearable pain pulsing through his body. "Don't think you're just going to pass out on us just yet," a woman's high-pitched voice yelled. "You are going to feel every ounce of justice that we have for you. It is the least I can do for what you did to my brother." Even the voices of those around him were inaudible to the boy. With everything that was happening to him, his mind was in ruins. One man walked up to the boy brandishing a knife that looked menacing and said, "I say we carve off his human disguise to see the fox underneath." The orange top of Naruto's jumpsuit was torn off by him. The man began to carefully fillet the flesh from Naruto's right broken arm while exposing his chest as the others urged him for more. The man proudly displayed a wide strip of flesh. A young girl was carrying a package around at the time, trying to find the person who was supposed to receive it. "You can succeed, Hinata. This year will be the one. Don't give up. You must express your feelings to him. He deserves to know. Even if he doesn't share your feelings." Hinata had been putting a small gift on Naruto's doorstep for his birthday every year since she was 7 years old. This year, she was going to confess her feelings for him in addition to giving him the gift in person. When she saw the boy with the blonde hair, she wished that her determination to pursue her goal would not waver. To the sounds of applause and celebration, the young girl with the lavender eyes turned the corner close to his apartment. The village was celebrating its victory over the Kyuubi that day, but this area was far from the festivities. She heard a sickening slap of something landing at her feet as she approached to see what the celebration was about. She examined what it was, looking at the landing spot. She could not quite make out what it was. It was covered in what appeared to be blood and dirt from where it had landed. She realized what it was in one sickening motion after noticing the tan coloring. Upon closer inspection, the skin was human. She noticed a small semicircle of people. When she looked up, the orange clothing was tattering, and in the middle of the circle was a pile of bloody and bruised flesh. "Naruto," she whispered, gasping. One of the individuals standing above him caught her attention with a glint. He was about to lower a big knife that he was holding above his head. Hinata's body reacted instinctively, but she had no idea what was causing it. Halfway through, she dropped her gift for the now dead boy. As she ran directly at the man, she tackled the man to the ground by leaning her shoulder into him as she came as fast as she could manage. The man was lying on the ground, struggling to breathe after being cheated out of it by the young kunoichi. Since Hinata was unable to correct herself upon impact, she also lay there. Now that she had a clearer picture of his condition, she turned to face the orange heap, which was an unidentifiable mass of clothing, limbs, and flesh. She yelled, "Naruto!" While assessing the damage, he was lying on his left side, half curled up, as if he was unable to control his legs and they were unable to be pulled any closer. As he was being pulled from the socket, his right arm was twisted and bent in an unthinkable manner, indicating that it had been broken in 3 or 4 places. His face, which was bruised and swollen, was the worst thing she saw. If not for his distinctive blonde hair and orange fashion sense, the distorted features would have rendered him unidentifiable. His eyes diverted her gaze from the features. One was almost completely swollen shut, and the other had half of its lids removed. The white had turned blood red because all of its blood vessels had burst. Every indication that he was still conscious of what was happening to him came from the blue orb that swam in that red sea. She was staring into the eye of her longtime crush, and it was breaking her heart. She saw complete and utter defeat in his eyes, something she never imagined she would ever see. One of the men there grabbed her by the throat and lifted her up before she could get back up to defend him. Look what we have here, the demon's little savior. The sole female visitor appeared. That is the little girl that follows him around, hiding in the shadows. I bet you love this demon bastard. Are you looking to become his demon slut? I bet he has already infected you. With a sneer, another man said, we will have to see if she is for ourselves now, won't we? Pulling a sharp kunai from his side pouch, he followed her. He brought it straight up, cutting the material from her small frame as he slid it between the materials of her skin and undershirt. The man yanked the top of her outfit from her front and whistled while still holding her firmly by the throat, which she fought to keep air in her lungs. Damn, look at that soft skin. I bet it feels nice. Too bad she is a little too young to sample. The man with the kunai retorted, who said she is too young? Look at her headband. She is a shinobi. By law she is an adult. At the sight of the young topless girl, the other people in the room began to swarm around her and lick their lips. There is no reason in their eyes, Hinata thought, and they have adopted a mob mentality. She glanced down at Naruto, who was attempting to use his one strong arm to crawl toward her. He moved almost imperceptibly, hardly at all. She began to cry in the hopes that anyone would find them sooner because of all the attention that was now on her. She was being held in the air when a newcomer approached and began yanking her pants off. Her shinobi sandals came off with ease, and before long, she was wearing nothing but her underwear. I bet she will be screaming for more once we are through with her. The woman then glanced at her face and her eyebrows went up in recognition. Hinata felt relieved that she had at last realized her mistake. Isn't that the Hyuga heiress though? Hiyashi would kill us all if anything was to happen to her. Knowing that her father would likely be relieved to finally be free of her, Hinata would cry if she could. However, the possibility of her father's alleged response might at least give her and Naruto an opportunity to flee. We will just tell everyone that the demon Brad did it in a fit of rage. We only just happened by when we saw him kill her. We tried coming to her rescue and killed the fox demon, but we were too late. Hell, they will probably make us heroes for finally getting rid of him. As he put an arm around her and painfully clutched one of her growing breasts, the man behind her laughed evilly at the thought. He said, I call first dibs. As he began to lick her face from neck to ear, the scent of sake emanating from the man would have made her gag and throw up if she could have. Naruto heard, save her. The voice was deep and throaty, full of malice and hatred. Naruto was unable to discern its source right now. The only sound he could actually hear was Hinata's muffled sobs as the mob attempted to surround her. The voice repeated, take my power and save her. How? He couldn't even speak. It was all in his head. It appeared that the crowd that had caught up to him this time had crushed his larynx, preventing him from screaming for assistance, so he didn't think he could speak. In his mind, the voice said, take my power and save her. Now he felt a surge of energy burst from his body as soon as he heard the final syllable. Let's make sure she can't get away or scream for help, the woman said. Another man lifted and braced her right leg, saying, good idea, wouldn't want our new toy to get away now, would we? With all of his weight on her femur, he lowered his elbow. The bone snapped in two. With a loud snap, she let out as loud a cry of agony as she could, but the hold on her throat only produced a squeak and a sob. After taking the line, the man who was still holding her by the neck returned his hand. He swung forward to meet her face, his fist closed, and he used all the strength he could muster. There were several pops and snaps. Her nose and jaw were most likely broken, and it's possible that the rest of her right side of her face was also fractured. Everyone stopped what they were doing in the next instant. There was a low, guttural growl. They paled at what they saw when they turned around to look for the source. They separated enough that, right before she passed out, Hinata was able to see where the noise was coming from. Before the darkness began to take control of her thoughts, the heap on the ground that had once been her beloved was glowing red. Their initial target and the reason for their celebration caught everyone's attention. 4 chakra tails were swishing violently behind the forgotten demon brat, who was dripping red chakra from every part of his body. The boy's remaining skin began to melt away, and his limbs began to move on their own initiative. Bones were starting to heal and reset themselves, and the bag of flesh was popping and cracking. Someone yelled, it's the demon fox, kill him before he can get to his feet. Hinata collided with a wall after the man holding her threw her behind him. There was a loud crack upon impact as her body continued to sustain damage silently. She collapsed to the floor in a heap that nearly matched her beloved. They suddenly rushed forward to meet the fox boy. A surge of chakra erupted from his body as they got closer, healing the final bones. Everyone was splayed out like bodies from an unidentified disaster as a result of the tremendous pressure that sent them flying back and landing on the ground. With a protective red chakra cloak wrapped around him, Naruto stood up as he looked around. He saw that people were rushing to stand up. He turned to face the pile by a wall that was stripped of almost everything. Hinata, he thought. A dark, feral growl came out of Naruto's mouth as some of the attackers stood up rapidly. Naruto swooped down on the group. He began to weep at them with no regard for their lives. Determined to see justice served, he would not abandon anyone alive. Around him, screams of terror broke out as body parts flew in all directions. He circled them all to make sure there was no chance of saving a single soul, even after they were all dead. As though he were holding the most delicate object on the planet, Naruto approached Hinata, reached down, and gently lifted the young girl. The single statement was, "She's dying, Kit." His fox-like eyes began to well up with tears. In a panic, he asked, "What do I do?" "If you wish to save her, you will follow my instructions." The Kyuubi began giving the young boy instructions. "I can't do that," exclaimed Naruto in terror. "You must if she is to survive. She has a broken nose and is currently choking on her own blood. She also has a broken leg. Her head and back injuries are the worst. Kit, 2 fractures have been made to her spine, and severe bleeding is beginning to reach her brain. She is unlikely to be able to function in society, even if she is discovered by medical professionals or taken to the hospital." The fox stated in a matter-of-fact manner, "You have to do this now. It is the only way." He thought rapidly while gritting his teeth. This is Hinata, an academy friend. She was determined to become a kunoichi, and she was going to lose that goal. "No, I can't let it happen. Even though she will later despise me for it, I must do it." Leaning down, Naruto could see the tears she had shed during the assault. There was still a hint of fear in the salty, pungent smell of her perspiration. He could smell her lavender scent beneath it all, in her skin and in her hair. He realized then that he could follow her just by her distinct scent. He hesitated a little, then brought her chest to his mouth, biting into the fleshy area just above her heart on her left breast. In the process, he stimulated her already failing coils by pumping his chakra into her system. As his teeth sank into her flesh, he glanced at her face and noticed a tiny flinch of agony in her bruised features. A tiny smile that exuded reassuring warmth then took its place. He saw a small amount of blood mixed with red chakra pour from the 2 holes in her breast. When he extracted his teeth, it began to crisscross in several directions as it snaked around her breast. The image of a fox appeared on her breast when it finally stopped. Its tail was wrapped around Hinata's nipple, and its eyes were the 2 holes Naruto had made with his teeth. It was sitting proudly on her chest, as though it were the most regal thing in the world. "What is that?" he pondered. "For now, Kit, there is nothing to be concerned about," the fox reflected. "Not until the middle of winter, anyway. For now, you just need to know that she will be alright." Naruto turned to face the carnage he inflicted on those who attempted to harm Hinata. "How am I going to respond to this? Everyone will put me to death when they discover what I did." His thoughts were filled with real fear, and the demon fox believed that considering the way the village viewed him, it would be a justified feeling. "For now, you're going to run as far as you can," the Kyuubi said bluntly. "Get out of the village, leave, and never look back. However, this is my house. I'd like to live there." In light of the fact that his dreams might have abruptly ended with his actions here only moments ago, "I am pursuing my dreams of becoming Hokage and defending those I love." A deep snort ran through his head as the Kyuubi laughed evilly. "Have aspirations of becoming Hokage and defending these individuals? Do you still wish to defend those who have beaten you to within an inch of your life? I'm not sure if you're simply naive or brain dead. These walls will not hold your aspirations of greatness. I have no doubt that they will attempt this again after this most recent attack." Given the impression that the fox had prevailed, he gave in and said, "All right, I'll just drop Hinata off at home and we'll go." "Kit, bad idea. The kitsune mark is on her. They will treat her the same way you do, or worse. They will believe that she has been corrupted by a demon like these idiots, and they will torture her, possibly raping or killing her. Let's bring her along. She, too, is done with village life." There was urgency in the fox's voice now. However, Naruto was getting irate, "And I believed you had stated she would be alright." His composure was pushed over the edge not only by the idea of the Kyuubi deceiving him but also by the idea of Hinata being beaten and maimed by the villagers. "Kit, she'll be fine. All I said was that she will live, but as long as she has that mark, she will continue to be treated the way you do now. Decide. We have to leave. Others are on the horizon." He encouraged Naruto to continue since he knew their time was up. Holding Hinata close to his chest for protection, Naruto remained in his four-tail form. He began walking toward a section of the village wall where he knew there was less security. He paused to pick up and examine a small object that caught his eye. "This is a gift on the little package." He read the name. "Is it for me? Why would I receive a gift from someone?" Then he remembered that it was his birthday. He would frequently find a gift on his doorstep today. Recalling the last few birthdays, he had the same exquisite white paper with lavender flower designs as the previous ones was used to wrap this one. He glanced down at Hinata, who had given me all those gifts. However, why would she do that? This girl seems to love you, he thought, with a faint chuckle most likely has for a long time. Naruto was aware that the fox's statement was most likely accurate. In all his life, he never imagined that he would be loved. He always believed that no one would ever love him. He then considered what the people were saying when Hinata was attacked. They claimed that she was always too shy to tell him that she followed him around in the shadows then, because she loved him. They attacked her. Any reluctance he had to bring Hinata along vanished in a flash. The first person to ever open her heart to him, he would defend her. He roared in pain as he looked up at the sky, and the sound reverberated throughout the village. Then, in a flash of red light, he sped off to the village wall and leapt it in one bound. No one knew where he was going. A little while later, Hiruzen stood watching the village from his office window. Reports of the incident in the slums had just reached him, even for someone who served in the Second Great Shinobi War. The images of the region were graphic. Some of the villagers appeared to have been torn apart by a wild animal that had infiltrated the village. There were entrails and legs all over the place. A few questions remained that he was unable to answer. A set of clothes that appeared to have belonged to a young girl was discovered, but no body fitted. The majority of people who knew anything about chakra experienced that massive surge. Numerous local veterans assert that it was demonic in nature and that it seemed to be the same chakra that the nine-tailed fox possessed. There was a great animalistic roar that shook the windows all over the village just before the chakra signature subsided and the Anbu showed up. They finally had a lead, but they didn't know what had happened. They discovered a young girl in one of the apartments with a view of the scene. Unfortunately, because of the trauma she had witnessed, the young girl was in shock and unable to speak. She was at the interrogation department right now so Inoichi could look through her memories of what happened and get the answers they needed. The scan had begun several hours ago, and the Hokage had begun to worry about how long it had taken. Hiruzen refused to call the meeting to order until the report was finished, even though the council had already gathered. The Hokage finally let out a sigh of relief when he heard a knock at the office door. He said, "Enter," and saw the head of the Yamanaka clan come in. The man appeared to be a few shades paler than the old man remembered, suggesting that something was wrong with him. He asked worriedly, "Are you feeling fine, Inoichi-san?" With a wobbling gait, the blonde man walked to the desk. "Yes, Hokage-sama, there were a few complications during the scan and you have my apology for the extra time needed to get you the report." After returning to his own mind, the sickly-looking man experienced complications, including losing his constitution. He had never in his life witnessed the horrors that the young child had seen. Ordinarily, he would have simply gotten the information he required and informed the Hokage, but he couldn't leave the little girl there with them any longer because he had been so traumatized by the memories. He needed almost 30 minutes to recuperate. Although he was unable to erase the memory due to the extent of the damage to her mind, he attempted to lessen its impact. He set the report down on the Hokage's desk and bided his time until the questions came. Hiruzen began reading the report while standing in front of his chair, but it only took a moment before his knees gave out and he fell back into his chair as his light lunch threatened to make a second appearance. The elderly man began to feel as though he was going green. "Are you sure you're not over-embellishing things here, Inoichi?" The brunette simply nodded. "No, in fact it may be understated, as the details gathered into the memories of a child are not as great as they are normally found in adults." "And what about the girl?" Considering that after witnessing all of this, the girl's mental health would undoubtedly suffer severe harm. "I wasn't able to remove the memories, there was just too much damage. I was only able to lessen them. Currently she is in the psychiatric ward of the hospital. With a few years of therapy she should be fine." He was hoping that he would be. Hiruzen merely gave a nod. "The council has assembled. I can understand if you don't want to attend after your assignment here." "I will attend as well. I don't think anyone in that room will understand what happened by just reading the report," Inoichi stated. As they turned down the hall, you could hear yelling as the two headed to the council meeting room. Inoichi was seated with the Shinobi Council, and Hiruzen stood in front of his chair in silence. The Shinobi Council awaited the report. Blood was being demanded by the Civilian Council in connection with the killings of multiple villagers. Hiruzen yelled, "Enough!" and slammed his hand on the table to draw everyone's attention. Copies of the report were distributed by him. The Hokage observed the expressions on everyone's faces as they read the pages. Mebuki glanced over the report and exclaimed, "So the demon brat did do this. We need to hunt him down and finish him off." The woman with the blonde hair was glared at by Hiruzen, who said, "Mrs. Hirano, you will watch your tongue when you speak of the boy. That boy, as you call him, murdered several people. I saw the pictures and it looked as if a bear walked into the village and shredded them," she replied. More civilian council members concurred and began calling for Naruto's prosecution. "They were trying to skin him alive, for crying out loud," he yelled. "It is what he deserved. I am sure of it. He has been nothing but a plague on this village since he came into existence," said another individual. "From the memories we had gathered from that young child, Naruto was just content on letting them kill him. He didn't even react to the beating they gave him. He did nothing until the young Hinata Hyuga was in danger. Does that sound like the monster you think he is? Hiruzen breathed a sigh of relief that they irrelevant. As to the reason he attacked those villagers, the way he treated those bodies is nothing short of inhumane. It looked as if he played with their organs and made sure he ripped their limbs off. They found a leg buried into a wall by 6 inches. I dare you to tell me that isn't the work of a demon. Mebuki came back. As the elderly man described the scene he examined, a small amount of bile floated to the back of his throat. He steadied himself again, swallowing hard. They beat the young girl within an inch of her life. What is worse than that? They were all making an attempt to rape her, a 13-year-old girl who was about to graduate from the academy tomorrow. Since Hiyashi had remained silent about his daughter's attack, everyone turned to watch him. He shrugged his shoulders as he glanced at everyone who was staring at him. In all honesty, it would have done me a favor if they just killed her. My only regret is that I didn't put the caged bird seal on her before this all happened. She was weak and inferior to the Hyuga name. The Hyuga head's icy response caused all of the shinobi in the room to gasp. Inoichi sprang to his feet with a slap of wood, slamming his chair to the ground and slamming his hand onto the table. His feelings were still raw from what he had witnessed. How dare you, you heartless son of a bitch, he said. It might as well have been his daughter, he thought, his thoughts still racing. That is your daughter, and all you have to say is that it would have been a benefit if she had died there after being used like nothing more than a child's plaything in the worst of ways. Sitting stoically, Hiyashi's eyes were slightly agnished that someone would dare to address him in such a manner. Do not misjudge me, Inoichi. This turn of events does give me cause for concern. It seems that the brat kidnapped her from the village. I do not know whether she is alive or not, but I hope she is the latter and no one finds her body. If someone was to get their hand on her unsealed eyes, it could be disastrous for my clan. For Inoichi, that was the final nail in the coffin. Seething with anger, he lunged at Hiyashi. Shikaku and Choza, his former teammates, were the only things standing in his way. Your daughter was beaten and broken, and then they were going to defile her, and all you can think about is protecting your precious Byakugan. You even have the nerve to call yourself a father. I hope your youngest learns the truth about you, you soulless bastard. With all this information about the incident and the one person who tried to save her, you side with the civilian council in calling the boy a monster. Take a look in the mirror. High and mighty Hyuga-san, the only monster or demon I see right now is the one in front of me. He said his friends were terrified for their safety if their blonde teammate put a little more effort into his attempt to mutilate the pale-eyed clan head. Inoichi straightened up and turned to face the Hokage, shrugging off his friend's hold. I think you're right, Hokage-sama. I do not feel as if I am up to attending to the council this evening. My previous mission has taken a lot out of me and I fear that I may not be able to control my actions as of right now. We all know we wouldn't want another demon running around the village right now, as I am feeling the loss of my compassion for humanity right now, and there are a few people that I wouldn't mind adding to that body count, he said as he looked at the civilian council. If you would please excuse me, I will take my leave. It sounded like a pin dropping when Hiruzen nodded, and then the door shut behind Inoichi. Then there was a commotion and demands from everyone. The old man was rapidly developing a migraine. He yelled, "That is enough. To get everyone's attention. It is very late as it is, and we will continue this tomorrow. Meeting adjourned until then." What about the demon brat? He is still out there running loose, and a very real threat to the village. We should send out the Anbu right now to hunt him down and kill him, Mebuki responded. I said this meeting was adjourned. Do not think you have the power to make such demands of my shinobi. You madam do not. If you are that scared, I suggest you run back home and lock all your doors, turn off all your lights, hide under your sheets, and pray to Kami that the demon does not find you. The Hokage turned and left the council chambers after hearing that response, only to hear more arguments from both sides. The morning had just broken through the horizon, with the last of the night sky gone. Since there was no way to sleep for the night, one person had witnessed it come and go. There was work to be done, of course, to get ready for the next day, but he couldn't sleep because of his mind. His mind would still bring up the scenes of yesterday's violence. No matter how hard he tried, he had been denied sleep. And eating also didn't seem possible. Bile would rise to the back of his throat whenever he thought about or looked at the pictures, threatening to carry with it whatever he could possibly imagine. His body was beginning to feel the physical effects of the mental stress. He strained his eyes to find any hint that would lead him to the location of the two missing academy students as he went over the file once more, as he had done for the majority of the night. They still haven't located them after almost 18 hours. When he pulled some of his more complex pranks, it took half the Anbu to catch him, which was not surprising at all, Hiruzen reflected. However, they ought to have discovered something. According to the reports, Naruto was carrying Hinata and was seriously hurt. That ought to have caused him to slow down to make such a quick recovery and vanish. Naruto must have used the fox's chakra. What was the amount he could have used? Was he overcome by the demon? It would be unlikely that they would find the girl alive. If he did, he probably escaped the fox's influence because they haven't discovered her body. At this point, the Hokage could not get much worse. He had to assign search teams to find them in addition to dealing with yesterday's attack. He made new listings and completely threw out his plans for team assignments of the soon-to-be graduating genins. If he could prevent the council from getting involved, it would be unlikely that they would be accepted for team assignment and held for the following year, even if they were able to locate the two. In addition, the village had to be cleaned up following the raucous celebration last night. After word quickly spread that the demon brat had permanently left the village, the villagers celebrated with greater fervor than they would have at the Kyuubi festival alone. Numerous people were now detained in the Anbu containment facilities. There were a few burned buildings, and trash was strewn all over the place. The medical staff was busy trying to heal those who had been caught up in the more dangerous festivities as deadly fights broke out. Hiruzen heard the window behind him open and let out a long sigh. This was not something he was anticipating. He had hoped that, given the current circumstances, fate would be kind to him and provide him with some sort of relief. Even though he knew the time was approaching, in fact, it was past due. Fate wasn't meant to be so generous. The white-haired Sannin told the Hokage, "It's good to see you, sensei. I didn't expect you to be up this early when I returned to the village, but as I was on my way to the Bada, I mean to expand my research. I saw the light was on, so I figured I would hand in my report and go check on my godson. I know I missed his birthday yesterday, but he was fine with all of his friends celebrating with him. I don't think he would like an old man like me embarrassing him." He laughed loudly. Hiruzen stiffened like a board at the mention of the man's godson. This would not be simple after 13 years away. The Sannin had intended to return to celebrate Naruto's birthday and witness his ascent to the rank of Genin. Hiruzen had even assigned the blonde to his father's student teaching team. Prior to the incident, he believed that Kakashi would be the most qualified person to instruct the boy because he was the Yondaime's pupil. After observing his sensei's tenseness, Jiraiya moved to the front of the desk and settled into a chair. "You look like crap, old man. I can see why. After seeing the state the village is in, looks like the festival went a little out of control, you know. I never really liked it. Seemed like they were celebrating Minato's death just as much as the containment of the Kyuubi. The only thing that makes up for it is the fact that Naruto is celebrated as a hero for it all, I guess." Hiruzen waited for the worst, shaking his head slowly and remaining silent the whole time because of the demands of his job in his spy network. He had deliberately chosen not to tell his godfather about Naruto's treatment. He would have hurried back to tend to the boy himself if he had known how his godson was treated. Although it was self-serving, the village benefited from it. The old man shook his head and slid a folder toward Jiraiya, who looked at him bewildered. He reluctantly opened the folder he had picked up and began to read its contents. The response was nearly immediate. He felt anger radiating through his entire body, and his body went rigid. It came from his entire body, not just his heart or core. His anger had reduced him to a single, tense muscle. As he read more, his body changed in a number of ways. He was rendered pale by the crimes and horrors inflicted upon his pupil's son, the hero's offspring. There were probably enough people Jiraiya had tortured in his line of work for them to consider Ibiki a saint. In contrast, it would be believed that only a demon could carry out the acts against the child. As he approached the end of the file, he gritted his teeth and asked, "Where is the rest of it?" The words, "I don't think thaw," were spoken quietly. "I don't give a damn what you think right now," he shouted. "I want the rest of his file. If I don't get it, there is no one in this village to stop me from tearing it apart to find it. I don't know how you could let this happen to him. You willingly ignored his parents' dying wish, and this is how the village responds in kind." Hiruzen rose from his seat and went to remove the image of the Yondaime from a picture frame. He opened the small safe behind the photo and took out a folder that resembled a sizable portion of the encyclopedia. Rearranging everything, he went back to his desk and placed the contents of the safe in front of his old pupil. He let the man peruse the contents without uttering a word. Jiraiya assumed this must be a joke as he skimmed through the folder, page by page. Pages from hospital visits, Anbu detainment memos, civil complaints, additional hospital visits, and even a few pages about his expulsion from the orphanage were included in the folder. Not wanting to return the file until he had had time to go through it all, he closed the folder and placed it in his bag. There was a blaze of devastation visible in his eyes when he turned back to face Hiruzen. "What the hell happened here, old man? I don't want to hear any damn excuses or apologies. You sent me on this assignment 13 years ago, giving me your word you would watch after him. I returned today to find out that rabid animals have been treated better. Where he is concerned," the Hokage said, "things are complicated." Nothing he heard seemed to be able to calm his anger, and his old sensei's remarks weren't even making him feel hot. "Complicated, my ass. He was less than a year old when he ended up in the hospital for the first time. For apparent blunt force trauma. How does a 1-year-old suffer blunt force trauma in a 1-story orphanage? The elderly man recalled the incident and winced at what his student had said. Blood dripped from the boy's ears and nose, giving the impression that he was just one large bruise anywhere Naruto was concerned. He felt ashamed he didn't live up to his pledge to keep the boy safe. He replied, after losing. Don't you dare say you're sorry. You have no right to try to apologize to me for the horrors this kid went through. I tell you what, why don't you try apologizing to Minato and Kushina? Let's see how well they receive it. Apologize to the kid. He was the 4th son, for crying out loud. You didn't even have enough respect for him to ensure that his kid was safe. You really are a piece of work. Now look here, Jiraiya, the Hokage said in an attempt to establish some control. You have been gone for the last 13 years. On a mission you sent me on, with the assurance that you would care for him, asked the Sannin. Yes, I know, but it still does not change the fact that things have changed here in Konoha. The village does not operate as it once did, he said. He made his point by slamming his hand against the desk. No shit, it doesn't. But from the last thing I remembered here, you at least had some authority and a will to use it for the good of the village, but obviously you couldn't do that, because you couldn't even care for Naruto. Or is it you cared more about the village than the child that helped save it? This village wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for him. We have councils that override me from time to time, especially where Naruto is concerned. They have looked to the boy as an excuse for anything that is wrong in their lives. I have done the best I can with what I have. He was aware that he was mistaken and that there were other options, but the results were uncertain. He didn't hear anything from his sensei that would help him comprehend. You haven't done shit, obviously. And what is this about councils? Last I knew you were the Hokage. You had the final say in everything. Council's approval or not, you have fallen, old man. You were known as the god of shinobi. Now you're nothing more than a joke-playing politician. Just tell me where he is. I will get him, and we are leaving the village until I can find a reason to return this time. He accepted the insults as a result of his failure, and they were justified. His student was correct. He could have exercised total control over all decisions pertaining to Naruto, but he decided against it out of concern for the consequences of the threats from the civilian council. The statement, "We don't know where he is at the moment," was made with a sigh. Jiraiya was about to blow up when she said, "What do you mean you don't know where he is? It's been nearly a full day and you still haven't found him?" He only wanted to remove his godson from this hellhole, but fate had decided that was not possible at this time. In the report it stated that he used the Kyuubi's chakra in defending the girl, and then leapt away. We think he left the village, but no one reported seeing him leave. Hiruzen came back. He uttered incredulously, "With these injuries he should be in ICU for the next 6 months. Most of his injuries heal in about a day, 2 at most. Only the most severe injuries will take near a week. We think this is because the demon's chakra is healing him," he told his student, grateful to some unidentified force. The idea made Jiraiya laugh. Seems ironic, doesn't it? The demon fox who tried to destroy this village is healing the child that the village is trying to destroy. If he is reaching this level with the fox's chakra, he is likely talking to him too, considering the fact that you kept everything from him. If the fox shares Naruto's origins with him, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he releases the fox of his own free will to destroy this village. They would deserve it after what they have done to the child. Jiraiya rose from the seat and walked toward the window. "I will go look for him myself, and you better hope I can find him before any such notion does happen. When and if I return with him, things will change around here, starting with Naruto's heritage being revealed. Then I will handle that damn civilian council myself." After saying those final words, Jiraiya left the Hokage with his head lowered and went in search of his godson. Late in the morning, the forest echoed with a single, spine-tingling scream. The local wildlife attempted to swiftly flee the danger that would undoubtedly follow such a noise. Forest rodents hurried to reach their burrows before whatever made the sound pursued them, and birds flew into the air as deer ran for deeper brush. The girl, sitting upright and frantically waving her arms and kicking her feet to ward off any potential attackers, was the source of the sound, which came from just inside the entrance of a small cave. The fact that there were no attackers visible anywhere on the site increased its visibility. When she eventually opened her eyes, she frantically searched her surroundings to determine her location. She had just entered a cave when she noticed the wall behind her. As her mind whirled with information, she scooted quickly on the ground to lean back against the wall. She would probably see what she last remembered as she continued to try to find her location. She would flinch in terror as faces sprang to the front of her mind. She could hear what they were saying and their laughter in her ears. She attempted to rock herself into some sort of comfort by pulling her knees up to her chest. Convulsions tore through her body, and the visions continued to torment her mind. Much to her dismay, she abruptly turned her head and let go of what was still in her stomach. Sadly, it wasn't much considering how long it had been since her last meal, and the acid bile that leaked burned her throat. She could still feel a man's hand firmly clutching her breast, causing pain, and the kunai pulling her clothing away from her skin. One by one, the memories of the attack returned, and she felt a sharp pain in the spot where another man had broken her leg. She even let out another scream into the open cave because of the memory. Since she could still smell the sake-soaked breath of the man who had licked her face and sent her into convulsions, she attempted to throw up once more, but all she got was dry heaves. She felt pain as the side of her head was crushed by the memory of a man who had hit her when the memory finally gave way. Hinata covered her face with her hands and began to notice something was wrong. She expected to feel real pain and disfigurement as her hands touched her face. Not just the memory, even when touched, the skin wasn't as tender as it usually is when there is a bruise. The attack scenes flashed through her mind as the truth of her location began to sink in. It seemed as though two different realities were alternately present. She began to feel the coldness of the cave floor against her skin as she looked down at her leg and realized she was not wearing any pants. She found that the previously broken leg was pain-free. When she reached down and touched it gently, she moved it carefully, and the operation proceeded without any problems. In sharp contrast to what her mind was telling her skin should be, it was soft and unblemished. She saw some orange out of the corner of her eye, and she was struck by another wave of memories. Reminiscences of the beaten and bruised body of the one person she loved more than anything else. Naruto! She exclaimed inaudibly as a wave of sobs and trembling gripped her. She looked at the orange and saw that it was her loved one's jacket. As she tried to force herself to look past her troubled thoughts, now it was the only thing keeping her warm. Draped over her shoulders, it was splattered with a lot of dried blood, which made it stiff and discolored. She took it off her right shoulder to have a better look at it because the right sleeve was missing because her bra and shirt were gone. Her breasts were visible to the entire natural world. She breathed a sigh of relief as she looked at her body and found some small comfort in the fact that, aside from the small amount of dirt from being on the cave floor, none of her skin was marred. Until she became aware of a tiny drawing across her left breast. She tried to rub it off with a finger to see if it could be removed. A dull pain spread across it as she did so, but it refused to smear. The image she now noticed resembled a fox, and her breast felt soft to the touch since it didn't just wipe off. The ink must be permanent. Thinking that she could try to take it off later, she tried to push it to the back of her mind. She needed to know where she was, because now the memories were just that. In an attempt to preserve some of her modesty, Hinata put the jacket on correctly, slipping her arms through the ripped hole in sleeve. She began to stand on wobbly legs and exited the cave, zipping up the jacket as much as she could. As she arrived at the mouth, she looked around for anyone in the thick forest. The last she knew, she was in Konoha, and now she was standing in a vast forest where plants were growing freely. Many of the sun's intense rays were blocked from reaching the ground by the dense canopy. The area was brightened by the few rays of light that could penetrate, giving everything a rich, deep color, and it seemed as though the entire forest floor was covered in clouds. She glanced quickly across the forest floor and noticed an odd patch of orange a few yards away from her current position. As she approached it, she was able to identify the object and, more significantly, what it was on. She walked over to it as fast as she could in her bare feet. She began to examine the body in front of her while kneeling. Hinata began to cry again, but he was motionless and face down. His clothing was torn, with tiny rips and tears. Some of his clothes were covered in blood, and then she had the most bizarre thought. Blood was all over the clothes, but there was no blood or damage on his exposed skin or hair. He should be dead based on her memories of seeing him in the village, and judging by the fact that he was motionless, you would think so too. His limbs were twisted during the attack and ought to have been bent in a distorted manner here. His body should be covered in wounds and trauma. He appeared to be in perfect health and showed no signs of injury. Just like her, she reasoned that this must be genjutsu or an illusion. She tried to dispel any such trick by releasing a small amount of chakra from her system, but nothing changed. This was reality. To see if the front of him would reveal anything about what had happened, she gently grabbed his shoulder and rolled him over toward her. He was still wearing his black undershirt and his pants. One of his shinobi sandals was missing. The outcome was the same. He was unharmed, not even bruised, despite the fact that his clothes looked like he had been in a battle to the death. He lay on the forest floor, and a small amount of dirt stuck to him. Naruto-kun, Naruto-kun, wake up, please wake up, was her gentle first nudge, which became a little harder as the seconds went by. Not waiting to see if her fears were realized, she became increasingly agitated and started crying. The longer he stood motionless, she would probably become dehydrated from crying so much at this rate. At last, he moaned a little, enough to give the impression that he wanted to take the day off. He heard someone calling his name as the slumber gradually began to fade. As he grew closer to reality, more memories of the past began to occupy his thoughts. He suddenly leapt to his feet, Startling Hinata and nearly knocking her back, he exclaimed, "Hinata-chan." As his eyes opened and then closed once more due to morning blindness caused by the light from the nearby forest, he began to scan the area around him. Blinking quickly to adjust to the light when he finally saw the girl beside him, he heard her voice calling out to him. "Hinata-chan." He exclaimed once more before jumping at her and embracing her. The abrupt contact with Naruto caused her body to stiffen, but it gradually began to relax and melt into him. She had already put her arms around him and was giving him a firm hug before she even realized what she was doing. Her body seemed to be reacting to his and acting on its own initiative. In the past, even if he gave her the slightest glance or attention, she would simply pass out for the pale-eyed Hyuga. This was a novel feeling, and she hoped it would last. She pushed herself away reluctantly because she needed answers more than she needed the blonde to hold her. "What happened to us, Naruto-kun? Where are we, and how are we not injured?" He trailed off as a memory surfaced, saying, "I think I saved you when they attacked you. As far as being hurt, I usually heal quickly, a day or two at most. I don't know how you..." His face flushed rapidly as he relived the experience. He whispered, "I bit you," as he peered at the young girl's chest. Hinata tried to hear what Naruto had said, straining her ears. She was finally able to comprehend what he had said, and a gradual mental process began. "I'm fine though," she answered. She continued, trailing off, "I don't have a mark on A." She slowly pushed the jacket's top forward a little to reveal her left breast. The picture of a fox remained, its tail still encircling her pink nipple as though it were protecting it. She then raised her head to gaze at the blonde, who was averting her gaze a little but keeping eye contact. He reluctantly nodded, and although it didn't look like it, it explained to her how she received the marking. In retrospect, she reflected that she ought to have been appalled and perhaps even violated. On the other hand, she felt warm all over when she thought about Naruto's mouth on her skin. The idea of his lips kissing her skin while he held her caused her body temperature to rise as blood gathered in her face. She shook her head in an attempt to regain consciousness. Hinata stammered deeply as she tried to ignore the warming sensation in her body. "Is that what healed me?" she asked. His face was getting redder by the second, so he nodded slowly. He was embarrassed by his actions. He walked away, appalled at the idea of her being broken and dying. "I don't know why or how, but something told me to, or else you would die," he said. She tried to reassure him by putting a hand on his shoulder after hearing the pain in his voice. "Thank you, and Naruto-kun." He turned his head when he heard how earnest she was when she said, "But I hurt you, Hinata-chan. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to." "You have nothing to be sorry for." She was unsure if that was true, but for the moment it was what he needed to hear, and she wanted to be what he needed, so she tightened her hold on him to make her words more powerful. She didn't know where they came from, but they felt weird. What had happened seemed to intensify her feelings for him, even though it was true that she had a serious crush on him and may have loved him more than she realized before the incident. She firmly stated, "What you did may have very well saved my life." He hung his head and asked, "Is the mark still there?" She gave a nod and continued to think about the picture. Now with genuine affection her Naruto-kun had given it to her. Naruto abruptly turned his head and peered in all directions. The young Hyuga became a little alarmed by this. "What's wrong?" inquired Hinata. In his mind, Naruto heard a voice. Its deep, guttural voice had said, "Run." He searched for the source of the voice, but he was unsure of its origin. Then he recalled hearing a voice as he attempted to reach Hinata after she had been attacked by the mob. He dismissed it, believing it to be merely a consequence of his trauma. He could hear it as clearly as day now. "You must flee," the voice repeated, still searching for the source. Naruto exclaimed, "Who's there?" out loud. The girl became even more perplexed by this and began to look around, but nothing was visible. "People are approaching from this direction. They're probably coming to get you. They'll find out where you are if you don't relocate quickly." Once more, the voice said. "What is so bad about that? I have to go home eventually, and I'm sure that Hinata-chan wants to see her family," she replied. When Hinata heard those words, she experienced a range of emotions. She was content to be with the boy in spite of their current circumstances. She would also like to visit her family in the village, whom she cared about, to tell them she was okay, at least, but the pictures of her father made her shudder a little in terror as his crass words replayed in her mind as she watched her beloved speak to an invisible person. Her greatest emotion at the moment was worry. Just think about what you have to say instead of speaking out loud. The girl is getting scared of you. Her fear is odorous to me. She is deeply worried about you. Naruto noticed the concern in Hinata's eyes as he turned to face her. The voice went on, and he simply nodded in agreement. "Remember what you did yesterday to those people? After the carnage you caused with those bodies, do you really think they'll let you live? They will undoubtedly prevent you from leading a normal life if they don't kill you outright." With the mark on her chest, her life will become what yours has been. After examining her, they will declare her demon tainted and expel her, just like you have. Recalling the destruction of his assailants' bodies, Naruto turned pale. He lost control due to his anger, and he took it out on those people. He tore them limb from limb, frequently beating someone with an arm or leg as a weapon. He became green as he witnessed clawed hands, possibly his own, slashing at several people's midsections, causing their insides to drop to the filthy floor. One person only suffered a minor but deep gash after taking a step back after a swing. He leapt at her once more, grabbing her head and slamming it to the ground as the woman desperately attempted to grab her insides and push them back. The cracking of the skull punctuated the impact, and the overwhelming pressure caused her eyes and parts of her fleshy pink brain to burst from the eye sockets. In a fit of dry heaves, Naruto rolled onto his hands and knees. He glanced at Hinata after they had stopped, and her worry for him had only increased. Then he realized that the voice was probably telling the truth. Even though Hinata had been one of the few people who had ever shown him kindness, he would not allow her to suffer because of anything he had done. Even if his death didn't really matter. Naruto stood up, his legs trembling. He started taking off his pants while glancing down at Hinata, who was still on his knees. Hinata was shocked by what she was witnessing. Knowing that something had happened in his head, she began to move away from him. What are you doing, Naruto-kun? She eked out. She imagined them to be romantic at some point in their lives. Despite her youth, even though it was one of her biggest fantasies and frequently appeared in her dreams, she was unsure of how to respond in the moment. As her words sank in, he glanced down at her once more. When he saw her pushing herself away from him, he swallowed. He had a clear view of her underwear, the only original garment she still owned, because her legs were in front of her and slightly apart with red cheeks. He turned away quickly and told her what he was doing. "You can't go around looking like that." He tried to sound unconcerned, but he liked what he saw on the inside, though he wasn't sure why. She completely forgot that she had forgotten to wear pants until she looked down at herself. Knowing that Naruto could now see her most private areas, besides her underwear, with her legs in front of her, made her feel dizzy. Her body and mind were reacting in two different ways. Her mind and body were rebelling as well, causing a wave of heat to spread to her once exposed womanhood. While her body closed her legs and pulled them in from the embarrassment to avoid fainting, she had to turn her head away and concentrate on her breathing. She noticed Naruto's pants hanging in front of her out of the corner of her eye. When she turned around and reached up for her only means of protection, she saw Naruto standing in front of her wearing a black t-shirt and blue boxers with toads on them. When the blonde gave her an embarrassed look, she stopped herself from laughing a little. She stood up quickly and put on the pants as she watched Naruto take off his lone shinobi sandal. "Something tells me there are people on their way here right now," he said, recalling the voice in his mind. "They are coming to take us back to Konoha. As far as I can tell, Hinata-chan. I won't make you come with me, but I can't go back, not after what they did to me last time." "You mean there were other times?" Hinata asked, her eyes widening as the tenses of those words replayed in her mind. The idea of the villagers repeatedly torturing her Naruto-kun made her irate. She was aware that the villagers denigrated him, called him derogatory names, and occasionally even threw rocks at him, but they still repeatedly maimed him. In an attempt to hide the shame in his eyes from her, he turned his head away and nodded. "This happens every year on my birthday. Most of the time I would just get a beating, but this time was the worst. I thought I was actually going to die this time." He had the sudden sensation that someone was attempting to take his life. He knew it was Hinata as soon as he heard the sobs and felt the shaking. It was odd because no one had ever cried for him or shown genuine concern before, nor had he ever received an embrace. However, he saw this timid girl from the academy doing both. He tried to think about it while standing motionless. He turned around in her arms to give her another hug. Deciding to accept it in her arms, he experienced a sense of security and warmth that he was unable to explain because of his inexperience. To get her attention, he gave her a gentle push back. "Thank you, Hinata-chan. They're almost here and I must leave before they spot me." A tiny hand gripping his arms stopped him in his tracks as he started to move away. He watched her as the tears streamed down her cheeks. Hinata was frantically shaking her head in an attempt to speak. "I have to, Hinata-chan. You saw what they did to me. To you I won't go through that again," he said, not wanting her to strain herself with thought. "You can't go, not without me," was the phrase she found when she shook her head more violently. She was sobbing and unable to stop herself in comparison to his life. The issues she had with her family seemed insignificant. She was aware that her family had looked down on her because they believed she was weak, but they had never beaten her for fun or with the intention of killing her. Whispering, "Hinata-chan," he said, "because I love you Naruto-kun," she exclaimed as she finally managed to say what she had been dying to say to her beloved. Her cheeks turned bright red as though the sun had burned them, and her eyes widened to the size of saucers when she saw the shocked expression on his face. She used her newly discovered bravery to charge forward. She put her arms around his neck and pulled herself up to kiss him on the lips before she could lose her resolve. She was shocked when he put his arms around her waist and drew her closer while applying more pressure. All Naruto knew was that the girl in front of him had confessed her feelings for him and planted a kiss on his lips, but he had no idea what he was doing. He wasn't sure whether he was merely responding to what she had done or whether he had a deep-seated affection for her. He didn't want it to stop. Whatever it was, having someone express their feelings to him and yearning for the idea of being loved was at least an opportunity to hold onto a dream he never hoped to awaken from. He nodded as they soon parted. Still holding each other, he held Hinata's hand as they walked out of the area in the hopes of separating themselves from those who might try to retake them. The academy, as they waited for their soon-to-be ex-teacher to enter the room and give them a glimpse of what their future might hold, 7 young students filled the room, talking loudly. They would all be formally recognized as ninja today since they had all passed the genin exam as adults in the village's eyes. They will receive additional shinobi training and end up working as villagers and assassins. While some may become famous for their greatest achievements and become their own legends, the majority will live their lives in secret, their actions never known to the village. Everyone wants their dreams, no matter what they are, to come true. For a young boy with dark hair, it was a step toward acquiring the authority he required to fulfill his ambitions for retribution. He was thinking about his objectives while brooding and attempting to ignore those around him. A pink-haired girl who had been attempting to speak to the boy before being cut off by her old friend and current fiercest rival was sitting on one side of him, shouting across to the other side. They were always fighting for the boy's love and attention. It was the same today as it had been before. The voice of the person with the pink hair yelled, "Just watch, Pig, I will be on Sasuke-kun's team." They argued face to face across the boy's lap. The blonde girl snapped, "Not a chance." Billboard brow. "Besides, if you haven't noticed, there are only 7 of us here. What is that supposed to do with anything?" She snapped back, not understanding what her rival was trying to say. "Each team is made up of 3 genin. Billboard. With only 7 here, there are only enough students to make 2 teams. That means someone will have no team and will have to wait until next year." Ino continued to prod the class's smartest girl, acknowledging that she still hadn't figured it out. In the hopes that she wouldn't be excluded, she cried, "That means nothing. I will still be on the same team with Sasuke-kun, Pig. Still haven't figured it out, have you? Everyone here besides you is a clan heir. Do you think they will pass on us when they could just push you to the side knowing that your family comes from the civilian side?" Ino asked, grinning and laughing, shaking her head. She didn't really think she would be on Sasuke's team. Given how successful they were in the last war, they would probably try to recreate her father's team with the clan heirs. She continued to put it in her rival's face. Despite that, Sakura had to acknowledge that her old friend was correct. After glancing around at the other students, she began to feel afraid of falling behind or being excluded. She crossed her arms and threw herself back in her chair in an attempt to conceal it. "We will see about that, Pig," she sighed angrily, unwilling to acknowledge it. Frantically, she recalled that there were 2 more people who were also expected to be in the class. The quiet Hyuga girl was supposed to be here as well, if the rumors were accurate, and the class's blonde knucklehead somehow left after school let out yesterday. Unfortunately, there were a lot of rumors about the Hyuga disappearing in the village, and the blonde was wanted for interrogation regarding bodies discovered in the village's shady area. Maybe, she thought, there was hope. After a short while, the door to the classroom opened, allowing their teacher to enter. To get everyone's attention, Uruka-sensei paused in front of the class and cleared his throat. "Class, I will be calling off the names of the new genin teams. Once I am done, you will wait here for your new team captains and senseis to retrieve you. Teams 1 through 6 are still in active status, so we will begin with Team 7. This will be Kiba Inuzuka, Shino Aburame, and Sakura Hirano." Sakura glanced at Ino, looking both disappointed that she wasn't on Sasuke's team and proud that she had been given a team. At the time, Ino appeared somewhat concerned. She was aware that her chances of not being assigned a team now were 25%. The village would not pass up putting Sasuke in a team, so she was pretty sure her chances were lower than that. She was lower on the grading curve than the other 2 students, and since he was a member of the Uchiha clan, they would want to do it as soon as possible. Team 7 will be led by Kurenai Yuhi, Uruka added. Next is Team 8 led by Asuma Sarutobi. This will be Shikamaru Nara, Choji Akamichi, and Ino Yamanaka. The 2 girls exchanged astonished glances before they could see each other. A boy's body slammed his hand down on the desk in front of him. "What the hell about me? What team am I supposed to be on? You cannot leave me without a team. I demand to know why this happened," he yelled. Knowing that this would occur, Uruka said, "Yes, Sasuke Uchiha." Without even looking up from his paper, Sasuke was a demanding student who always believed he was superior to everyone else. He frequently enjoyed proving it to people who didn't share his opinion. You are to report to the Hokage tomorrow to discuss your further training. Your new senseis will be in shortly to retrieve you. He left the class after the final statement. Everyone in the room stood with their mouths open as Sasuke, who was handling the news in a terrible way, kicked the chair behind him and left the class as well. For a team, the renowned Uchiha had been passed over. The afternoon his thoughts strayed from everything that had happened. He wasn't feeling particularly proud right now, and there wasn't much in the room to cheer him up. With no sense of order, accusations and debates flew from mouth to ear as arguments broke out across the large table. Many thoughts went through his head following his earlier meeting with his student. As he reflected on that exchange, a tiny flame began to ignite in his chest. How was he unable to recognize the changes he had undergone over the years? He was once a shinobi god, a great leader, and a great man. He is now a shadow of the person he used to be. He wasn't sure whether it was the earlier encounter with Jiraiya or whether he was finally losing his mind. Enough! He screamed as everyone stared at the Hokage. Silence descended upon the camber. They haven't heard the elderly man address the council in that capacity in recent memory. He took a moment to make sure that everyone understood how serious the situation was now and that things would begin to change quickly. I know it is late, and for that I apologize. This is not a meeting, so you may endlessly bicker to each other like women in a bathhouse. I am the Hokage, and although I have seemed to let my sanity slip and forgotten my role in this village, leaving most of you to corrupt the values of generation past, I will look past this and we will start anew right here. Mouths hung open. Shikaku was now listening as well. They were unsure whether they were being insulted or not, and the wording was difficult to understand. A portly man from the civilian side decided to express his ignorance by asking, "What gives you the right to speak to us as such, and make accusations that we are corrupt?" As Hiruzen began to stand, a frown came over his face, drawing more attention and somber glances from the other participants. But just as he was about to charge at the man, there was a loud thump coming from the door, which had been locked to keep people out and stop them from listening in. Before the doors fell forward in a cloud of dust and shrapnel, there was another loud boom. A voice from the cloud said, "Because he is the Hokage, and you are nothing more than a sniveling worm that feeds off the suffering of others to gain the insignificant little bit of power you only think you have attained," in a tone that challenged anyone who dared to dispute the truth. Few people were able to identify that voice, and the Hokage sighed, realizing that this was unavoidable. The room was sealed in some of the most potent fuinjutsu the village had to offer, for those who knew the shinobi ways. This person was both angry and powerful, as evidenced by the fact that they came through it as though they were simply knocking on the door. A huge hulk of a man who most people had only ever seen smiling strode through the cloud, sneering as he glanced at the people at the table. As he continued to walk, his wooden sandals clattered on the floor and his long white hair swayed lightly back and forth behind him. Hiyashi asked, "What is the meaning of this, sensei?" "This is about how this village treats its own people, how you all have become so bloated in your own egos. You have forgotten that you are here to serve them and protect them," Jiraiya said, turning his head toward the voice and glaring down at his former pupil. "That is exactly what we are doing here." Before your rude interruption, we were in discussions on how we were going to go about protecting the village from that demon child, Mebuki said with an air of arrogance. He was at her seat, holding her by the throat, almost instantly, as though he had perfected the fourth's technique. It was more than enough to make it extremely painful, but not enough to stop the blood or airflow. "Speak of that child again in such a manner and the next discussion you will be having will be with the Shinigami on how you soiled yourself even while your head was crammed in your ass." He threw her out of the chair she was occupying and stood on the table using her seat as a step. He wanted everyone's full focus, even on the woman who was lying on the ground, rubbing her neck and struggling for breath. "It seems to me that promises here in Konoha have not been kept," Jiraiya said, mockingly addressing the Hokage. To his astonishment, the elderly man was wearing a tiny smile. "I have been away from the village for these last 13 years, protecting her from all forms of hostile intentions. Kumo was ready to march on our doorstep after the attack of the Kyuubi, thinking us too weak to defend ourselves after such a slaughter with the death of Minato. Iwa was finally frothing at the mouth to take vengeance against the village that was the home of the Yellow Flash. Even Suna, who is an ally, was tempted to take advantage of our weakened state in an attempt to procure some land for more fertile resources." He glanced around the room to make sure everyone understood that they would have fallen long ago if it weren't for his efforts. "As I stood at the spot where our beloved Hokage and his wife gave their lives to save this village, a promise was made to me while I held a small child in my arms. It was not only a promise to me but the fulfillment of the last wish of the Hokage, to protect and care for his son, and see him for the true hero that he is." Before anyone could say, "Minato Namikaze didn't have a child," Hiyashi was the first to piece the words together. The fact that Hiyashi and Minato were members of the same genin team under Jiraiya's training was well known. If his teammate had been expecting a child, he would have known. The pregnancy was concealed from the public because the mother had special circumstances that would have jeopardized the entire village should something go wrong, said the wise man. In fact, the reason you allow the villagers to torture Naruto is why Kushina's pregnancy was classified. Konoha has had the Kyuubi sealed within someone since near its inception. The first person was none other than the first Hokage's wife, Mito Senju. It was then transferred to Kushina, Minato's wife, before Mito passed away. Minato, in a desperate attempt to save this wretched village, sealed it into his own son on the day of his birth after his wife and himself were dying from protecting Naruto. Why were we not notified of this? Inoichi asked as a fist slammed down on the table close to Jiraiya's position. Because the civilian council sealed those records from the public records and future councils, Hiruzen said after hearing all of the information. And that is why I am so pissed right now. You are the Hokage of this village, you have all the power, and you did nothing to stop this. Jiraiya turned to face the elderly Hokage and walked down the table to look at his sensei. I spent years looking out toward our enemies, ensuring that they would never seek to attack us. Little did I know that the biggest threat to my family was within these walls. You speak in a tone that is threatening to the village, that is tantamount to treason, said a slender man who had been listening to everything with a regal appearance. Like I give a shit after everything you have done to my godson, Jiraiya remarked as he approached the lay councilman. He sat on his heels and gazed intently into his eyes. What are you going to do if I said I was threatening the village? Are you going to detain me? Haul me to the interrogation building for a little of your re-education classes? Asked the man. I would like to see you try. I will be leaving the village though, but not to return to my network. I will be following and finding my godson. I have a good idea where he is heading, he said as he stood up again and moved to the center of the table. Sume inquired, then you will be returning to the village? Jiraiya nodded. No, I will be training him and his young girlfriend. We may return, but it definitely won't be for some time. But believe me when I say this, when and if we return, there will be hell to pay, especially to those that sit in this room. Mention of his daughter's involvement with the demon child made Hiyashi tense. There will be no such thing as my daughter fraternizing with that thing. A smile that sent shivers down everyone's spine appeared on the white-haired man's face. Normally I would just take your head for referring to Naruto as a thing. I will let that slide because what I offer you now will cause you more pain than I could ever inflict on you. He took a small package out of his pocket, which appeared to have been wrapped in fine paper as a gift. Hiyashi grabbed the package, which had previously been opened to inspect its contents, and opened it again. Hiyashi paled as he looked at the object. A picture frame with a tiny frog in the top left and bottom right corners was inside the tiny box. However, the proud Hyuga was upset about the picture. His daughter's shy smile in the photo was strikingly similar to the smile of his deceased wife, to Naruto. I love you, was written in a very beautiful handwriting on the picture. Hokage, shouted Hiyashi. You must send out a search team immediately and bring my daughter back, alive or dead. It matters not to me. Under no circumstance may that tainted boy sully the Hyuga bloodline. What is wrong, my student? Don't tell me that you are afraid. Jiraiya responded. Now what could the great and mighty Hiyashi Hyuga ever be afraid of, I wonder? Oh, I think I know. Maybe it might be the prospect of pale-eyed, blonde-haired children running around, he said, his voice full of venom and sarcasm. The Sannin, reeling from the misery smeared across the face of the head of the Hyuga clan, leaned closer to his former pupil. That's right, blonde, pale-eyed children without your oh-so-precious seal to mar the skin of their forehead. Jiraiya could almost see Hiyashi's mouth dripping with foam. You know, I wonder what they would eventually try and the sounds they would create if I happened to gift them with a set of my limited edition, signed copy of my series. Your daughter looks shy, but I bet she is a screamer. That was the final straw for the head of the Hyuga clan, who lunged at his former teacher. Some would say that his eyes turned red with anger as he attempted a fatal blow. The older man raised his own hand and merely swatted the blow away. Jiraiya slammed the swirling orb of concentrated chakra in his hand into Hiyashi's right side of the chest. The clan head was hurled from his lunging position to the distant wall, where he slumped upon impact when the technique connected. The Sannin snarled, as one of my students, you should have known better. I am truly disappointed in you, Hiyashi. I will take my leave now, Hiruzen, but if or when I return I would expect there to be some redeeming qualities in this village. Jiraiya leapt from the table and headed for the door. After saying that, he shook his head regretfully and disappointedly as he turned around one last time before entering the doorway. Later on in the evening, two young teenagers were sound asleep near an open field, far from Konoha's, or any other village's, prying eyes. They felt secure in the knowledge that they were in a place where they would not be pursued. Only the roots of a fallen tree provided cover as they remained just inside the forest's tree line. The boy spread out further in the open, his orange trousers standing out against the grass's green hue. His body almost seemed to be on guard while he slept, as though he had been conditioned over the years to be vigilant about dangers even when he was asleep. A young adolescent girl slept under the tree's protection wrapped in a light fabric that looked like a sheet. She looked at ease. She had on a loose-fitting shirt and a pair of recently purchased baggy brown pants underneath the fabric. An orange jacket that matched the jacket of the boy's pants was also covering her torso. They came upon a village on their way to this destination, where the young man had sneaked into the yards of multiple people to obtain the items they now owned. Given their current situation and recent events, Naruto, the boy, did not particularly enjoy taking things that did not belong to him, but it was necessary. He made a note of where he had taken each piece of clothing so that, perhaps, he could reimburse them for the forced sacrifice they had made when he returned to this village. They ate in relative silence after a few bread crusts and the meager amount of meat he could find in the village, but they were all thinking the same thing. What now? Both of them were aware that their current course would take them to Yu Noukuni's northeastern border. As long as they maintained their strength, they should be entering Yu Noukuni in the coming days if they continued on their current trajectory. However, as they continued to approach Kaminari no Kuni and eventually Kumo, a fear began to creep up on Hinata. If she was discovered within their borders, the same Kumo who attempted to kidnap her almost 10 years ago would probably try again. The voice that kept telling him to go in that direction was indefinable to Naruto, but it had kept him safe thus far and ahead of the Persuaders. Even though he was unhappy with what he had done to Hinata, leaving a mark on her chest, he was glad she was safe. He would ask the voice why it was required or what it meant, and the voice would either say nothing or assure him that he would eventually understand. An ear-piercing scream startled Naruto out of his sleep as he lay there in restless slumber, trying to forget the recent incident from his home village and the predicament they were currently in. In an attempt to quickly clear the particles from his eyes, he shifted from a laying position into a defensive stance and looked around for the source of the threats. His eyes were the first to be penetrated by the dim outline of nature as the darkness engulfed the area. They were hidden from anyone who might happen to stumble upon their location by the first row of trees in front of him, which divided them from the open field beyond. He could see other trees to his left and right, but there were no dangers in either direction. He turned quickly to look inside the nest of roots where his female companion should be comfortably sleeping. The girl in the tiny natural alcove was thrashing, and it appeared that she was doing it while she slept, but there were no criminals there. She was wrapped in the sheet he had taken to help keep her warm in case it got cold at night or they had to build a cover of some kind, so it was a little strained. However, the whimpers and frantic breathing were unmistakable. Naruto lowered himself to his knees and stepped into the cramped area to see how the small girl was doing. When he looked more closely, he could see that the pain radiating across her face was breaking his heart. She was probably reliving the attack's events while experiencing a severe case of nightmares. He had never dreamed of the attacks on his person for his life. He had heard that those who experienced severe trauma frequently relived their experiences in their dreams, but he did not. He recalled the attacks, all of them, actually, but he had never experienced the crippling nightmares that Hinata was currently dealing with. Though the details of the most recent attack are a little hazy, he recalls being close to death before she showed up and swiftly finding himself in a similar predicament. Since she had no clothing on, it was likely that they had also attempted to rape her. In her sleep, she yelled, "Don't hurt him, don't hurt Naruto-kun." Her slumbering declaration made his heart tighten in his chest. Here was Hinata screaming for his safety while experiencing a nightmare in which her body was being broken. In her dream world, he reaches out and caresses her cheeks' soft, dirty skin. She moves an inch closer to the source of the warm hand that touched her, as if her body were doing it on its own. As she involuntarily rested her head on his lap and he repeatedly ran a hand through her short hair, finding comfort in the smooth sensation between his fingers, Naruto grinned. He became more and more exhausted over time, but he was reluctant to leave her side because it seemed that the nightmares stopped when she was close to him. After carefully shifting her and shifting himself, he eventually managed to lie down with her head resting on his chest prior to falling asleep again. He glanced down at the young Hyuga's face and could see the faint outline of a smile on her lips. After 4 days, Jiraiya had spent 4 days getting ready for his lengthy journey. He had to buy supplies for the 2 teenagers he would be tracking as well as for himself. The amount of information he needed to gather was also substantial. He had been away from the village for a long time, keeping his eyes and ears open for any potential danger. He was even more incensed at himself than he was at his former sensei. The one individual in his life who ought to have come first was overlooked and blinded by him. If he had to acknowledge it, he probably would have chosen differently 13 years ago, knowing only a small portion of what he now knows. Without a replacement, the spy network he so assiduously maintained would have been disbanded. He had no doubt that the son of one of his students would have graduated long ago under his guidance. It's possible that he would have begun teaching him about frogs and the frog contract already, perhaps even going occasionally to Mount Myoboku to observe the elderly toads and learn about sage training. Instead, he was at the gates of Konoha, 5 days behind his target. He didn't want to waste time, but he had to wait because he didn't know what to do when he got the two, and trying to chase them after them would have likely done more harm than good. Jiraiya had thoroughly searched Konoha for any information about his godson. As unfortunate as it was, the boy had a lot more enemies than allies after he questioned them. A few even vanished inexplicably over the past few days. There were no predetermined places outside the village that Naruto would run to because he had never left it before that anyone knew of, anyway, but there was reason for concern from people outside the village. It appears that the Hyuga clan organized a clan mission and dispatched a sizable squad to find the two teenagers. Although they were supposedly given kill-on-sight orders and had a 2-day advantage over him, they posed no personal threat to him. Additionally, the fact that he had no enemies outside the walls did not eliminate the possibility that he had any allies. Their trail was last discovered heading north by northwest. They would probably end up very close to the Iwa border if they kept going in that direction. It would be foolish to believe that the shinobi of Iwa would be as blind as the people of Konoha, who are blinded by their anger and hatred. The boy looked exactly like his father in the pictures he had recovered, with the exception of the whisker marks, of course. Because Iwa was neither applauding nor mocking of those who had Keki Genkai, the young girl would have very little to fear. The policy was straightforward. If a shinobi had won, it was a benefit. Otherwise, it didn't matter. However, if a shinobi were to spot Minato in Naruto, the best-case scenario would be a capture and public execution. The worst-case scenario would probably occur if the person was old enough to recall the war and the fights in which the Yellow Flash took part. The idea of a tortoise torture in the field, where they would probably slowly kill him, sent a shiver down Jiraiya's spine. The tragically humorous thing is that it would be exactly the same as what his hometown has occasionally tried to do to him. Knowing that this would probably be the last time he saw his former pupil, the Hokage materialized just as Jiraiya was about to depart. "Jiraiya," was his first word. "If you are here to apologize, old man, say that I told you I don't want any of your 'I'm sorry,' or 'I did the best I could.' You and I both know that is a load of crap," Jiraiya said. Hiruzen let out a sigh at the circumstances. "You were right, it would be, but I have a request of you while you are away this time." "Have you not already asked enough of me, Hokage-sama?" the Sannin hissed as his temper flared. "It is not for me," called the elderly man back. He wanted to make a request that would only help him if this is probably the last time he will ever see his best student. "When you find young Naruto, please give him my sincerest regrets for the mistakes of this old man. You can do that in a few years yourself. I will not apologize in your stead for the atrocities you allowed to happen to a young child," he said. "If too much time has passed and I am unable to, please do this for an old man. And that leads me to my second request. If anything is to happen to me, I have nominated you to take my place as Hokage," Hiruzen continued. "I refuse," was said in a hollow, flat voice. The Hokage asked, "But why?" in shock that his pupil would turn down such a distinction. "If I was to take that hat from you tomorrow, I would seal everyone within the village and burn it to the ground." His voice was devoid of regret. He no longer cared for his house, as though his soul had been sucked out of it. "You would be better off dragging Tsunade back, getting her to stop gambling and drinking to take up the job. If you start now, it may only take you a few years to find her. That should be a suitable sentence. A few more years behind that hell you call a desk, then I may tell him you're sorry, if you make the remainder of your time there worthwhile." Jiraiya continued walking down the path without saying anything more, vanishing over the horizon. The old Hokage let out another sigh, as though his entire world had begun to pause. The most powerful clan in the village was in a rage that more wasn't being done to protect their valuable bloodline. His charge was self-banished for failing to respond to the child's needs. His best student was more than angry with him, and he had not fulfilled the fourth Hokage's final wish. Desperation took root in his heart as he turned slowly and began the arduous journey back to his office. He needed a release, and he has been concentrating on one that is happening in about an hour. A council meeting was scheduled, and it was expected to be another opportunity to voice dissatisfaction over the exclusion of the last devoted Uchiha from a team. Even though he was too old to fight anymore, he was rapidly regaining his old respect in that room today. He would climb the ladder once more while severing the council members' legs of power that had helped place him there. The boundary when the two young teenagers arrived at the gorge dividing the two lands. It was almost noon. The next phase of their lives was ahead of them. Across the bridge and beyond the chasm, Naruto stopped and gazed out into space. He had never left the village where he lived until recently. After 5 days of travel from those protective walls, he was now prepared to enter a completely different country. He was frightened by the amount of change and the uncertainty they still faced. Up until now, they have managed to survive by robbing Hinata of some clothes from the first village they encountered, allowing her to travel more comfortably and shamelessly. Other than hunting and seeking cover while they slept, they had no other means of survival. They would arrive in Yu Nounkuni, the land of hot springs. After crossing this bridge, as far as he could tell, they were no longer being followed, and the voice inside of him had been urging him in this direction. They might have at last managed to escape their assailants, at least temporarily, in order to recover their strength and resume their travels. They might be able to take a few days off. Hinata informed the blonde that she had traveled to the country with her family when she was younger after noticing the direction they had been traveling. As a distinguished clan, the Hyugas used to frequently take vacations here, and they still maintained active accounts with one of the more opulent resorts in the tiny country. She hoped they could find the resort close to Yugakure's capital to rest and clean up without being noticed first before they departed once more. They might be able to purchase some supplies and charge them to the clan account. She dismissed Naruto when he expressed his worry about leaving a trace, like charging an account that would alert her family to her whereabouts. She told him that the clan would be long gone by the time the resort sent them any notice of account activity, which would take several months. They didn't intend to stay for very long. 2 or 3 days would suffice to obtain what they needed before they left the area and headed back northeast again, guided by Naruto's inner voice. Hinata did share the story from her childhood with her companion and express her apprehension about going into Kaminari no Kuni. In an attempt to reassure her, Naruto said that they should be able to avoid the main village and stick to the east coast of the country. After departing the resort, they would head straight east through Shimo no Kuni until they reached the coast, then continue on through Kaminari's mountains and cliffs. If they were lucky, they might spot a few tiny fishing villages and perhaps even avoid shinobi. A tiny, delicate hand encircled Naruto's and gave it a light squeeze, waking him from his reverie. Despite the fear pulling at him, he couldn't help but smile as he looked into her pale eyes. After giving her a nod, they started to move silently across the bridge, which they hoped would lead to a better life. They finally arrived at the front door of the hot spring resort, which the Hyuga were known to frequent in the past, after 2 days of travel from the border. Traveling had not been kind to them, and they were covered in dirt and road dust. In sharp contrast, the resort was spotless, with polished wood floors and white walls. Naruto was reluctant to be anywhere near the area because, in the village of Konoha, he would typically be chased with the threat of abuse at his heels or thrown out after a sound beating if he attempted to enter such a place. When the inside was revealed, Hinata's gentle pulling of the blonde past the threshold did little to ease Naruto's anxiety. The inside radiated wealth and prestige, as elegant as the exterior. Ink paintings of majestic scenes adorned the walls. The furniture was delicately adorned with golden inlay, and fine rugs were used in prominent areas rather than the bamboo mats that are typically used in less noticeable areas. They overlooked the man behind the counter who was staring at the 2 young people with a hint of disgust on his face while they were taking in the surroundings. "What are you 2 doing in here? We do not allow street urchin to dirty our establishment," said the man. The venom in his tone made both of them jump a little. Naruto's body responded to the words by stiffening like a tightly wound spring, ready to take off. Hinata inhaled deeply and turned to the voice, trying to relax herself. She gazed at the man with all the authority and grandeur she had been taught since she was a young girl. While he looked past the dirt and grime that called her face home, he noticed an expression of indifference in her eyes that contradicted the man's statement. A closer look revealed a series of emotions on the man's face: shock, surprise, and finally terror. "Hyuga-sama, please forgive me. I had no idea that it was you." "That is quite all right. I can understand the misperception as well. My teammate and I have had a rough time making it here. There were some complications along our journey," Hinata said. When teammate was mentioned, the man turned to face the blonde who had entered with her. He turned around slowly, and the boy was grinning broadly. "I see," said the man. "Is your family not with you?" She had learned the art of emotional control from her upbringing in the Hyuga clan. Because she was experiencing internal panic, she had maintained her composure on the outside while creating a plausible scenario to avoid raising suspicions. She noticed Naruto was perspiring just as much on the outside as she was on the inside. Starting with, "I am sorry, but they will not be arriving," she said. "We were not even supposed to arrive here either, as it is slightly out of our way." The individual reflected. "I have not seen anyone from your clan in some time. I do hope you still consider our establishment worthy of your business." Despite the intense pain of the memories, Hinata smiled sweetly. "I personally have not been here since the death of my mother, but we have always considered the hospitality of your resort to be more than adequate for our needs." "Little Hinata-sama, is that you?" the man asked, his eyes widening in surprise. She replied with a nod. "I heard of your mother's passing. You have my most sincere condolences for your loss. It had a great effect on the staff here when the news spread," he said with an expression of sorrow. "Thank you for your kind words, but that was many years ago, and we are in need of your services now," she said with a sincere smile this time. He said, "Yes, of course," with interest. With hope, she inquired, "Is our account still in good standing with your establishment?" Why yes, but what are you two doing so far out of Yu Nounkuni? He asked. She didn't enjoy lying at all, so this was going to be the difficult part. She had no idea if she was competent at it. As she spoke, she tried to process everything in her mind with all the determination she could muster, a hint of worry visible on her face. We are on assignment from the Hokage. The man exclaimed, "You're ninja?" with such surprise that the lavender-eyed girl almost screamed in fear. She went on, "Yes, and we are on a confidential assignment from," but was cut off once more. He questioned, "But I thought young ninja traveled in larger teams, 3 or 4. She let out a frustrated sigh. She might overlook a detail she worked out in her mind if she didn't tell her made-up story right away, which would raise more questions and make people aware of what they were doing. If you would let me continue, I'm sure it will answer all your questions. My apologies, Hinata-sama. I did not mean to be so rude and let my curiosity get the better of me. Please continue," he asked. She put on another smile, wondering how Naruto managed to do it so effortlessly. "Yes, as I was saying, we are on a confidential mission from the Hokage where a smaller team was necessary as to not arouse suspicion. As you may understand, secrecy is of the utmost importance. While we were camped for the night, we were surprised by a storm and our camp was washed away with most of our gear. What we were able to hold onto was too badly damaged from the wind and rain to continue carrying. It is only by chance that we were west of you and your establishment by a day's journey, so this was the most logical course of action to acquire new supplies so we may continue with the mission." "I see," said the attendant. "Should I send word to your Hokage or clan that you are safe?" She exclaimed, "No," a bit more loudly than she meant to. She explained after swallowing her heart, which had inadvertently moved to her throat while she was searching for a way out. "This is a covert mission and very little communication is desired, and no communication is preferred if possible. We are ninja and expected to find and use resources available to us. I am truly sorry to make it sound as such, but currently your establishment has become a needed resource in light of the aforementioned incident. Do not trouble yourself with such thought. We are happy to be of assistance. I am just happy that you and your teammate," he said, dismissively waving his hands in the air while turning to face the blonde, who seemed to be motionless and still sporting the same odd smile. He went on, "Survived the storm in one piece now. How may I be of service?" After Hinata nodded. To ensure she wouldn't forget anything, Hinata mentally recited a list of items. "We will need a room with a private bath, and food of course. Do you think you could find us a tailor that will be willing to accept a charge from the account here at the resort?" Yes, I do think I know just the person, and she does fine work, some of the best that I have seen as of late." The man pondered for a moment. "Then we will require her services as well. A few changes of clothes would do since our ninja supplies were washed down the river. We will need a resupply of those as well if you think you could manage it." She was hoping she was aware of their destination, and she did not like the thought of entering hostile territory unarmed. "I am not familiar with the tools that ninja use, so forgive my ignorance. Perhaps if you could write a list I could send a runner to fetch the things you need, but keep in mind, this is not a ninja village and we may not have all that you require within our markets," he said with thought. She began creating a separate mental list of everything they would require. "Of course, I will try to keep that in mind." "So, how long will you be staying with us, Hyuga-sama?" he inquired. She came to the conclusion that they could only afford a few days after considering how long it would take to get the supplies and how long they were willing to risk exposure. 3 days should be fine if we are not an inconvenience, that is. "Kami forbid. You would never be an inconvenience. We are happy to serve the Hyuga any time they are willing to grace us with their presence," he said in an attempt to calm her nerves. "So there will be 2 rooms for 3 days, plus standard meals of course." Fear began to overwhelm Hinata, and her heart began to sink into her stomach. She was aware that ever since the attack, she had been experiencing terrible nightmares, and she would frequently wake up as Naruto would shift into a lying position next to her. Her heart would relax and her nerves would calm. When he did this, she was unable to recall the terrible dreams that had initially startled her. By the time morning arrived, interjecting, "1 room would be fine." His features were slightly suspicious as he gave her a questioning glance. He was about to ask more questions when she clarified. 1 room with 2 beds, of course. That will be plenty for us. We have come here unannounced and ill-prepared. I do not wish to further burden your business with our unfortunate bad luck. You are doing us more of a service that you could possibly realize." When the man's smile returned and he nodded in return, she exhaled with relief. He started back for the counter to start the preparations, saying, "You really are too kind for being so concerned with us, but if you do feel that way then very well, I will have a room prepared immediately if you would not mind waiting for a bit." Hinata turned to face Naruto, who, to her amazement, was still grinning and standing in the same spot. When she looked more closely, she saw that his face was getting blue. She moved swiftly over to his side and touched his shoulder, asking, "Naruto-kun?" She started shaking him gently and asked, "Naruto-kun?" But he didn't respond. She practically yelled, "Breath, Naruto-kun." as he shook him more forcefully. He finally answered, taking a deep breath and gasping for air. Unfortunately, he became dizzy as a result of the large amounts of fresh oxygen arriving in his lungs as the color returned to his face. Hinata saw his eyes roll into the back of his head. His eyelids began to close as he swayed slightly and fell to the ground with a loud thud. As though everything were happening in slow motion, a smile appeared on Hinata's face, and no matter how hard she tried, she was unable to control the giggle that came out of her mouth. Close to Yu Nounkuni, the silver-haired man had traveled through the Yu Nounkuni forest for 2 difficult days. Following his departure from Konoha, he went back to where he had found the small gift meant for his godson. From there, their trail led them northwest until it disappeared, which greatly alarmed him for the young blonde. Every step in that direction was a step toward death. The children might be okay if, by some miracle, they had stopped traveling within their own country or even just entered Kusa territory. It was difficult to travel close to Taki because there were many swamp areas to cross. In addition to the difficult terrain, the swamps were home to a variety of toxic animals south of Kusa Aim, a nation shrouded in mystery at the moment. Since the conclusion of the Second Shinobi War, the regions have been subject to isolationism. Extreme hostility had been shown to the majority of travelers who had ventured into those territories since the white-haired Sannin had confronted him in combat. Aim's leader, Hanzo of the Salamander, had become withdrawn and paranoid. As a result, travelers and traders were more likely to use the areas surrounding Kusa. He swiftly navigated through tiny villages and forests while keeping that in mind, searching for any hint that would lead him to the kids. The only relief he felt was that the small group of Hyugas involved in the search were far from where he was. In addition to the fact that he might be able to use the information they had found to focus his search, he did not feel the need to fight them if they came across him. The eastern beach lost in the rich memories of the past, a lone man stood on the sandy shore of Yu Nounkuni. If the sad expression in his lone eye was any indication, life had a way of haunting him. He gazed at the glistening water while the waves swept across the shore, blowing his silver hair in the ocean breeze. He had no family, was homeless at the moment, and, in his opinion, had no one to call a friend. He sighed, "I've failed again," feeling a dull numbing sensation in his left eye, which was currently covered by a black leather patch. He thought to his first friend and rival. He was normally unconcerned by it, but when the memories came flooding back, it hurt because it served as a reminder of his failure. He glanced down at his hands, which were still covered in blood. To him, the blood of his other teammate who died still stained him, but to others, he would appear normal. Even though his eye hurt, it was nothing compared to the pain his heart felt when he remembered the expression on her face when his hand was piercing her chest. He would be plagued by that image for the rest of his life. As he recalled his early years, training with the man who had become his pseudo-father, images of yellow began to flash through his mind. As they relaxed and he became embarrassed while they told stories, he could still see his old sensei's silly smile and mop of yellow hair. His honor and his sworn duty as a ninja, from which he drew inspiration, were lying with this man. His life and Nindo were evidence of the greatness of his former teacher, who was now buried with his wife in the cemetery of his former village. Of course, his former teammate had taught him a code. In order to find safe passage from Yu Nounkuni to an island in the east, he had traveled out here in an attempt to find comfort in the far past. He is making a sort of pilgrimage to ask for forgiveness for all of his mistakes. He reflected on what had led him to this point and realized that this was the end of the line for him, the last of his former life behind his back. 3 days earlier he used to decompress by standing at the memorial stone. In an attempt to forget his past, he had avoided the village's spotlight. Joining Anbu had been a fantastic way to divert his attention from his shortcomings. He would have preferred to remain in the shadowy organization until he was compelled to completely retire from shinobi combat if he had had the option. Regretfully, he had to resign from his captaincy at the Hokage's request because orders were orders. His old armor had vanished, and he was now dressed in the traditional shinobi garb and a junin vest. He was startled out of his thoughts about the changes that were occurring in his life when he sensed that someone was approaching him. Raw emotions swept across the field where he stood, and the air almost seemed to thicken. He had seen someone he had not seen in a long time while looking in the source's direction. His famous theatrical attire and long, spiky white hair were a welcome sight, bringing back many happy memories of his training days. If the man's frown was any indication, most people would flee in terror at the potential devastation he could cause. However, Kakashi explained this as nothing more than his sensei's sensei being discovered while snooping around in some women's onsen. He waved to the older man and said, "Jiraiya-sama, it is good to see you. What has it been, 10 years I think?" As he approached the thinner man, a frown remained on his face despite the greeting. The Sannin suddenly swung back and struck the other just beneath the ribs, causing his lungs to deflate and sag due to the force of the blow. Kakashi felt as though his chest had exploded, but if the sound was any indication, there was at least one broken rib. He could see the knee being raised to his face through the tears in his eye as he crumpled over, but he was unable to react quickly enough. Another loud crack was heard, and he was certain that his nose had been broken, and that his left cheekbone might have broke. His face now facing the sky, the shade of being hunched over abruptly became bright as he was raised into the air. He had skidded to a stop, his head bouncing off the ground multiple times. His senses had adjusted to the harshness of combat due to years of experience, and he discovered that his body hurt a great deal for a few more seconds, at least, until the air returned to his lungs. Kakashi doubted he would be able to stand at all. The bright sky he was trying to see was abruptly obscured by the man who had just viciously attacked him, and a coppery taste began to emerge from the back of his mouth. The Sannin snarled, "You know damn well it has been 13 years now. Where in the hell have you been?" After waiting a few seconds for the man on the ground to stir sufficiently to allow him to understand what was being said, Kakashi's expression was bewildered as he gazed at the man, who had clearly been standing near the memorial stone until he was lying on his back in excruciating pain, and he asked, "Right here?" Adding more rage to his voice, Jiraiya repeated, "Don't play stupid, Kakashi. Why were you not there for him?" Kakashi was completely perplexed now. "Huh?" was all he could say. Although Jiraiya blinked in surprise, he was determined not to lose his temper. "Naruto, why were you not there for him?" His mind was racing for the details, so he blinked. Orange clothes and blonde hair emerged from the images that flashed through his mind. He hoped he was correct when he asked, "The orphan misfit?" "Misfit?" Annoyed, the older man reaching down, he caught the former Anbu by the front collar and brought him up so he could meet his eyes. He quickly gave the man a backhand across the right side of his face. When Kakashi's gaze seemed to settle, he continued, "Misfit? Is that how you think of him? Is that how you honor your sensei's memory, his legacy? You are lucky I am here instead of Minato. He would have just killed you, although I just may as well in his place." Fear took hold of him. If he was to understand the poison being spit in his face by those words, his life was at stake. His confusion about the situation did not help either. After all, why would he give an orphan child, particularly one in particular, his attention? Due to the destruction of the beast. There were a lot of orphans following the events 13 years ago. The word legacy lingered in his mind. "What do you mean, Jiraiya-sama? Minato-sensei didn't have any children," he had to ask. "You didn't know?" asked the Sannin, shaking his head in confusion. "Didn't know what?" "Kushina-sama was pregnant, but they both died during the attack." Theories began to swirl in his mind as he spoke. A 13-year-old child was the subject of a question from Minato-sensei's teacher. It was clear from his outburst that he loved the child deeply enough to beat him to a bloody pulp, if not kill him. If his threats were any indication, according to reports, his sensei, his wife, and their unborn child had all perished in the attack. "You don't mean?" Even as he released Kakashi, who simply slumped to the ground from pain and weakness from his onslaught, Jiraiya asked quizzically, "Even being his student you did not know?" He said, "Then I suppose you should get up to speed and fast," while he reached into his jacket. Kakashi deduced that the younger man believed he was going to draw a weapon based on the expression on his face. His face was slightly relaxed as he pulled out a folder containing copies of the current events and the reports on Naruto's file. He threw the folder with a flick of his wrist, and it fell onto Kakashi's chest. He quickly sped through a series of hand signs, biting his thumb and drawing a little blood. This caused him to slam his hand onto the ground, calling forth a bright green toad with long eyelashes and, oddly, lipstick. He gave the order, "Take him to the hospital, he has some research to do." Not wanting to question its summoner in such a foul mood, the toad simply nodded. It swiftly wrapped its tongue around Kakashi and flew in the direction of the hospital. Only 10 minutes had passed since the stunned Junin was uncivilly dumped at the hospital's entrance following the brutal beating he had received at the hands of the Sannin, and he was not in a good mood. He was swiftly led to a room where he read the file Jiraiya had thrown at him while he waited for a doctor to treat his wounds. It took a turn for the worse after the first few pages. Now, disgust and anger had taken up residence in his soul, and with every page turn and fresh report, they only served to adorn their new home with gloom. Before joining the Anbu forces, Kakashi served in the Third Shinobi War, so anyone familiar with him knew he was a battle-hardened veteran. However, the atrocities committed against this child would never have even occurred to them when they were torturing enemies for useful information. The floor would require a lot of cleaning if it weren't for the broken ribs that were causing him such pain. When his stomach clenched in an attempt to release its contents orally, he had turned several shades of green from the pictures and reports. The worst part was realizing that all of this was done to his now deceased sensei's only son, whom he believed had perished in the assault. He eventually arrived at the final report, which was issued just a few days ago until he reached Yamanaka-san's report. He blanched at the scene descriptions after carefully reading the Mind Walk's testimony. His body chose to ignore the pain in his chest and proceed with the removal of the contents that were in his stomach. He let the digested food splash onto the floor and quickly pulled the mask down so he wouldn't choke. Kakashi used the back of his hand to wipe the dribble from his mouth after hearing a few cracking ribs accompany the heaves he was trying to repress. Now he knew why Jiraiya was angry and about to kill. He was feeling exactly like the Sannin. To be honest with himself, at the conclusion of the docket he had just finished, he felt betrayed and hated. It is not surprising that he felt self-loathing for not being there when his sensei's closest friend was in the village, suffering, and he was powerless to stop it. Now that his breathing was under control, he put on his mask again and braced himself for what lay ahead. "Nurse!" he shouted, confident that a nurse would soon arrive and that everyone on the floor had heard him. The door flew open in a matter of seconds, and a slim woman with a frustrated expression came into the room. She halted in front of him and said, "Would you keep your voice down? There are other patients in this hospital, I will have you know." Then, before she spoke to him once more, she began to straighten her skirt, which had risen to her mid-thigh from running. "Now what is it that you need that makes you think that you should conduct yourself in such a manner? Get a doctor in here now," Kakashi snarled, disregarding everything she had said. "There are other patients that need attention, Soa," she began. He quickly reached out and took hold of her blouse, drawing her toward him with one hand. He reached across to roll up the sleeve, and with the other, he focused and pushed chakra into the arm that held her. The woman recognized him as an Anbu soldier immediately from the seal markings on his arm. He said, "I said now," which was like an hour ago, in a way that implied that whatever he said was the truth, and that it would be carried out. He released her after she gave him a quick nod, and she fled the room in terror. A short while later, a stout man entered the room. He appeared to be oblivious to everything else as he read the contents. While gripping a clipboard, he slipped on the regurgitated contents that had splashed onto the floor as he got closer to Kakashi, causing a loud crash. Kakashi sighed deeply, realizing that this would take longer than he had hoped. An hour later, another hour would pass before he reached his destination, and the time required to recover from his wounds did nothing to calm him down. With all he had learned from the file he had been given jumbled in his mind, he now stood at the door to the Hokage. His mind was spinning between the past and the present like a monotone instrument that has lost its single tune. The what-ifs and could-have-beens are playing. He seized the handle with a great deal of fear and pushed the door inward into uncertainty. Paperwork piled up around the Hokage as he sat behind his desk. He had been watching the village for years, but the events of a few days ago had increased the amount of work to a level he had never seen before. Instead of piles on his desk, there were now stacks of sheets on a table close to the wall, and any more papers were being sealed in scrolls until the office's volume was partially finished. The destruction his grandson-like figure was wrapped in sent requests for reparations and damages from all over the village, in addition to the usual forms, mission requests, project planning, trade inquiries, and minor disputes. Monetary compensation for physical and psychological harm, loss of life, and property damage was demanded. Naruto's entire file had been committed to memory by the elderly man, and anyone who mistreated the young boy during his formative years was immediately excluded. They would undoubtedly complain to the council, but following his student's performance, the blonde's behavior had become taboo and a subject they utterly disregarded. Since most people have been afraid to interrupt him for anything lately for fear of inciting the Kami no Shinobi's wrath, Hiruzen was truly taken aback when his door opened. Despite his guest's mask covering half of their face and his forehead protector covering one eye, there was no fear or trepidation in the one eye that was visible. He saw the silver-haired man's laughter and rage as an old shinobi. "Kakashi, I'm busy," he said. "Obviously you were too busy for him," Kakashi said as he approached the desk and tossed the file onto the papers the Hokage was currently going over. Hiruzen could tell by the folder's name, Naruto Uzumaki, that this was not going to go well. His explanation began. "Kakashi, there are things you don't know. Like how my sensei's son survived that night. Maybe it was the fact that I was lied to while he was being beaten by the villagers. Lied to, might I add, by you," he said, his anger erupting as he used his arm to swipe a stack of papers off the desk. Hiruzen cut in. "There was nothing you could have done. I obviously could have done more than you. I could have taken him in, cared for him, taught him," said Kakashi. "You would not have had the time while in Anbu," the elderly man sighed. "I would have resigned, rejoined the Junin forces, and taken normal missions. Hell, I would have chased that damn cat for the rest of my days as long as he didn't have to suffer anything like this," he said with a tear in his eye. "It is a moot point. I wouldn't have accepted your resignation. You were needed in Anbu," he said. In his throat, Kakashi snarled, "You wouldn't have had a choice." With a sharp edge to his voice, he returned, "You listen to me, "Shinobi Hitaki, I am the Hokage of this village, and you are under my command as a shinobi." "Then I quit," said Kakashi again. The Hokage asserted, "Request denied, now return to your duties." Kakashi threatened to say, "There are no duties to do unless I'm in the village to do them. If you leave without authorization, you will be labeled a missing nin of the village," Hiruzen said, his eyes widening at the implications. Reaching up to his forehead, Kakashi removed its protective covering. It was evident that the scarred eye was closed when it was removed from his left eye. Throwing the cloth-wrapped metal plate onto the desk, he said, "That isn't a problem if you are not associated with a village," and turned to leave. The old man called to his back, "You must begin training the last Uchiha. You cannot leave." "Then I hope you should find someone more loyal to the village than you have been as of right now. I don't see too many people loyal to anyone but themselves," Kakashi said as he turned to face the door. Then, without turning around, he entered the door. An ongoing adventure for a young girl with dark hair, the past few days had been nothing more than a dream. As she and her traveling companion got ready for the next part of their journey, she had been fulfilling almost all of her wishes. They had received lavish treatment from the resort staff, had their new clothes tailored, and had delicious meals brought to their room. As they discussed their pasts and tried to block out the unpleasant memories as they continued on, they speculated about what lay ahead. Even though she was nervous, Naruto had attempted to explain his motivation for traveling in this direction, and as long as they were together, she would trust him and follow him. She was always happier than the day before. Even when she woke up in the morning, she had fallen victim to nightmares once more after the first night of attempting to sleep in different beds in an attempt to console her and erase the terrible memory. Naruto had scudded into her bed and held her close to him. He had just crawled into bed with her for the 2 nights that remained, letting her rest her head on his chest as she fell asleep, enthralled by the hypnotic sounds of his heartbeat. She inherited habits typically associated with higher society because she was raised in the Hyuga clan. Among them is the innate ability to rise early in the morning to begin the day and avoid wasting valuable time that could be better spent managing clan-related issues. Her senses began to awaken, and her body knew that the sun was starting to crest the horizon. She did not want to leave the comfort of the bed she was lying in, even though she knew they had to leave today and soon. Her body was comfortingly warm, as though it were encased in the sun's rays. She began to notice her surroundings more and realized that Naruto was standing next to her when she felt a weight on her right side. Knowing that she would soon need to switch bra sizes due to her rapidly growing body, she became agitated when she felt tightness in her chest, particularly in her left breast. Unbeknownst to her, she let out a moan that brought her back from the dream world. At that moment, she became aware that her body, and more especially, her hips, was moving without her knowledge. The thing that shocked her the most was the sheer joy she was experiencing from the action of her legs rubbing against something. When Hinata sensed moisture between her legs, her eyes popped open, alarming her and making her panic worse. When she finally regained control over her body, she swiftly looked around to evaluate the situation. As soon as she realized she was still in the same room and bed, her breathing rapidly returned to normal. That was Naruto, still asleep as the world went on. Judging by the blonde mop of hair that lay on her chest between her right breast and shoulder, his proximity to her made her flush, but it was a comforting sensation. She reddened more when she discovered the cause of her tight breasts and noticed that her shirt was slightly raised when she looked down. Her blonde crush followed her as she rolled onto her back during the night. His hand had slithered under her shirt and was firmly grasping her left breast, while his right half was resting on top of hers. In an effort to prevent embarrassment in the event that he woke up, she made an effort to move. In an effort to remove it, it was enough that she was embarrassed, but all it did was make his hand move and tighten a little, like he was massaging it. The sudden sensation caused her to let out a high-pitched moan once again. Her body defied her will as the sensation caused her back to arch, giving her another sensation of her nether region rubbing against something. She tried to lower her heart rate, looked farther down her body, and used her sheer willpower to stop. She was surprised to find Naruto's right leg thrown over her and lying between hers, his upper thigh pressed against the junction of her inner thighs. She was experiencing fresh, unfiltered feelings. Her body ached for more, and it was almost primordial in nature. Unconsciously, she desired another test, so she gave her body permission to move a little again while focusing more intently on how it felt. She experienced the same joy again, but this time she became aware of something new. Her right leg was pressed against a stiffness that was really annoying. She moved again in an attempt to locate it and possibly move it from where it was pressing against her right thigh, but the boy who was half on top of her moaned. Then it struck her, and the object's source pressed up against her. Blackness crept into her vision as her brain began to shut down, much to her relief, and she wished she had woken up a bit later. Her face was always scarlet. A decade prior, 5 days had passed since they had left the comfortable resort where they were staying. They had only been traveling for a few hours when they came across a caravan that just so happened to be heading in the same direction despite Naruto's protests. They hurriedly searched for the caravan's leader. He had been persuaded by Hinata that traveling in a group would provide more protection than traveling alone. After they found the leader, they were initially turned away by a severe elderly man with a weathered face that was probably carved from years of a difficult life on the road. The man was not a fool. He was constantly wary of people, even those who seemed like kids. He was familiar with the ninja world in which they lived for the benefit of their respective villages. Even children received training in the art of killing. It was dangerous to bring new members into the small group without knowing who they were beforehand, and it was even riskier when they were traveling on the open road. It was Hinata's blonde traveling companion, rather than Hinata herself, who persuaded the man to let them join the caravan. She began to tell a story about her grief and desperation, wondering when she had become so naturally skilled at lying until Naruto opened his mouth. The man remained steadfast. He had begun to go into great detail about Hinata's deception, to the point where even a child would not believe them due to the enormous amount of color the blonde brought to the tale. The man finally gave in and let them join the group, assuming that someone who could conjure up such a fantastical story was obviously too dim-witted to be a ninja in disguise after all. The story went so far that he was certain the blonde child had a mental illness or had been dropped from a very high cliff when he was a child. He had no idea that he was probably correct, or perhaps on both counts. Over the course of the following 5 days, they moved steadily forward as a group, gradually reaching their next destination. They interacted with the merchants during their journey and started to learn about some of the people and their history, which they were happy to share. Those who sold tapestries and fabrics made up the majority of the merchants. Some focused on clothing, while others made pricey wall hangings and rugs. A small number of the group did sell jewelry and other fantastical goods to the wealthier members of society. An additional man was an expert in creating weapons that were suitable for both ninja and samurai. They had been walking all morning and were now resting their weary feet on the back end of a wagon after 5 days as it began to move across the other half of the blue canvas. The sun was high in the sky as they departed the rocking of their transport in cozy silence. Naruto and Hinata were at the moment in a relaxed state as the wagon abruptly stopped and a high-pitched shriek pierced the air. They were swiftly pulled from their separate reveries. In time to spot the kunai embedded in the caravan leader's head, the two turned their heads toward the front of the caravan. The man began to lean to his right as his body began to settle into a comfortable position on the wagon bench. As though in slow motion, everything around them exploded into chaos, and time seemed to catch up again. Flying through the air, shuriken and kunai searched for any target of wood or flesh to sink into. As the projectiles struck people, more screams erupted. In order to prevent any stray objects from occupying their bodies and evicting their souls, Naruto and Hinata swiftly ducked into the wagon they were riding in. "We need to run, Naruto-kun." A loud thud sounded against their guarded wagon, and Naruto turned to face her. As soon as their eyes locked, he nodded quickly and considered a way out of the carnage. These weren't ninjas. They were regular people. In order to make sure he had his supply pouch with him, he reached for the base of his back and looked inside the wagon for anything that might help them survive their plans to flee. He swiftly grabbed at two handles after they chose to rest on the back of the weapon merchant's wagon, which was fortunate for him. He discovered they were tachis when he took them out from under their clothing. They were longer than the kunai they were accustomed to using in the academy. "On my mark, we run," he said, passing one to Hinata in a hurry. Another round of thuds struck the wagon's side, and then, an explosion erupted close to the caravan's front, signaling that the attackers had decided to step up their game and begin using explosive tags to crush any opposition. He yelled, "Free, run," and they both slipped off the back of the wagon and fled into the rocky forest, attempting to avoid any oncoming pursuits or stray projectiles. A man saw two tiny bodies running for sparse trees, so luck would not be on their side. "Ghetto," he shouted. "Looks like two kids are making a break for it." The alleged man in charge sneered at his subordinate and called back to the spotter, "Take 3 men and run them down. We could get a good price for children on the open market, maybe even more if they're girls and untouched." He signaled 3 men in the area who were searching an already deserted wagon before leaving to find the preteen ninjas in training. As they passed through the trees, nobody observed that the two were moving quickly for kids who ought to have been in the middle of nowhere. While running for their lives, Naruto and Hinata began to notice a salty odor in the air and became alarmed. They cleared the woods they were using as cover almost without noticing, and the land opened up to a cliff area with the shore far below. There are 2 trails on the cliff area. One leads down the side of the cliff face, probably to the rocky beaches below, and the other leads up and over more level plains. Hinata gasped, "Naruto, what are we going to do? We can't hide out here." Suddenly, a whistle sounded, piercing the atmosphere. Instinctively, he spun and pulled the sword from its sheath, knocking the kunai down less than 2 feet away. 4 men landed in front of the two after the projectile, and the young blonde positioned herself defensively. "We have to run, Naruto," Hinata begged. The girls who spoke caught the attention of the men, who looked at her from her trembling ankles to her terrified eyes. "Look, Saito. Pale eyes, that means she is a Hyuga, right?" The small squad's leader glared at her, and if one could read his body language, they would see 2 different emotions flowing through him at the sight of her. Lust, which was always present, revealed the man's morals, and greed in the form of financial opportunity. "Will you look at this? It sure as she will definitely sweeten the spoils of what we got off this job. I'm sure Kumo will still offer a huge reward for a girl with the Byakugan, even if I have my fun with her first." Naruto began slowly reaching into his kunai pouch in the hopes that they wouldn't notice and be taken by surprise. "Didn't Geto say that if they were untouched they would be worth more money?" replied the man. As he pulled out another kunai, he approached her slowly. "Normally yes, but with her being a Hyuga we can ask for any price we want. Besides, they will just use her like a sow and breed their own Hyuga. We are really fortunate that the village entrance is only a little ways up the hill. I'll just be helping them get the process started. Besides, how many people can brag about pounding a tight Hyuga? I definitely will be enjoying this." Hinata's definition of fear changed when she heard what these men had in store for her. They would sell her to the village that attempted to kidnap her when she was a young girl, in addition to trying to violate her. The other 2 men, who had been silent since coming, began to glare at her and quarrel over who should be the second to bring shame to her body. The sound of her blonde hero growling in front of her jolted her out of her inner turmoil. He pulled 2 kunai out of his own pouch and hurled them forward as she glanced over his back as Hinata followed their paths. One of them sank into the neck of one of the quarreling 2. And Saito used his own kunai to knock the other one out of the air. She felt like she was being pushed quickly, and someone called out to her. "Go. Run, take the lower path. You won't be so open, keep going and don't look back. I'll handle these 3 and be right behind you," Naruto said. She trusted her crush and turned and ran without thinking. Fear made her legs move more quickly, and suddenly she heard the sounds of a fight behind her. Before she screamed in agony and fell to the ground, she had traveled roughly 1,000 yards. Gazing down at the kunai pierced through the back of her left leg, the source of the extreme pain. With a great deal of fear and preparation for the impending pain, she reached down, yanked the long knife from her thigh, and choked back a cry from her throat. Clearly, Naruto had missed one. Hopefully, this did not portend that the blonde would be apprehended or worse, and that the others were on their way as fast as he could. She threw the weapon over the edge of the trail cliff and stood up. She noticed a shadow coming from behind her, most likely that of the person who had thrown the projectile. She began running down the rocky downgrade again, using her chakra control to maintain her footing, not wanting to confirm her suspicions. A voice said, "What's your hurry, girlie?" She identified it as the man who had initiated the conversation. "If you save me time from chasing you, I'll do you a solid one. Won't let Saito have a turn with you, and after I finish I will just throw you off the edge here so you won't have to live the life of a breeding bitch. Sounds fair, right?" Hinata attempted to push herself more quickly after the alleged act of kindness, disregarding the limp from her most recent injury. She began to slow down without realizing it as dizziness set in. She tried to stop as her energy was running low, hoping to put enough distance between herself and her assailant. Her injured leg was smearing blood on the rocks as she leaned against the trail cliff face in an attempt to catch her breath. Her stomach rumbled suddenly, and she reasoned that emptying it would ease its discomfort. Rice and partially dried meats splashed on the floor, even covering the front of Hinata's sandals, but she lurched forward and obeyed her inner commands. Her hearing returned as she heard the crunching of gravel beneath someone's feet, and she gasped and spat the last of the bile from her mouth onto the floor. The man remarked, "Did you really think you could outrun me? Hell, with you bleeding like that, I'm surprised you made it this far, near the trail's bend." As her attacker approached, Hinata whirled around. The rush of adrenaline in her body was insufficient to make up for the blood she had lost, the lightheadedness and the contents of her stomach at her feet. As a result, the girl slipped on her stomach and fell backward, landing on her already injured leg and experiencing yet another wave of pain. Darkness began to creep around the edges of her vision as a result of the pain and the strain she was currently experiencing. She croaked, "No, stay away," through dry lips and a parched throat. "Don't worry, you don't have to be awake for what I have planned," the man said, laughing as he approached. A flash of red came from behind the man just before her vision dimmed. A claw went through the man's right side, causing it to suddenly burst open, splattering blood across her face. She heard a low growl that vaguely sounded like Hinata, just before sleep took her. Much later that evening, Hinata felt warm when she woke up, at least warmer than when she had fainted. That cold feeling was probably brought on by a significant blood loss. She opened her eyes slowly, and the warm glow of the fire near the cave's entrance made it clear where the warmth was coming from. After waking up in a cave once before, she realized, why does it always seem when I pass out I wake within a cave? And immediately felt her body for her clothes. She was relieved to see that she was still wearing her top due to the fact that she was missing her pants. Her confidence was undermined as she lowered her hands. The last thing her assailant mentioned made her stomach turn to dread. It's funny because after being violated, she didn't feel as sore as she expected. Her eyes began to well up with tears as she considered what must have happened, that she had been kidnapped and sexually assaulted by a number of potentially evil men. Her blonde companion was probably dead if this case were real. All the training had done me a lot of good, she said, feeling a twinge of guilt deep inside. There was nothing that I could do. I couldn't keep the person I cared about the most safe. She began to cry over her loss to the point where she failed to notice a human figure enter the cave. She also didn't hear the voice calling out to her as she drowned in her grief. The voice gradually grew louder until she could hear it over her sobs. Hinata-chan? Hinata-chan? She asked, slowly looking up with tears in her eyes as she noticed a blonde person approaching her. She screamed, "Naruto-kun!" and jumped into the air. Throwing herself at him, she put her arms around him and tried to pull him as tightly as she could. Forgetting the blanket that covered her to confirm that he was still alive, she was unconsciously pressing her nose into the cleft of his neck and taking a deep breath, attempting to absorb as much of his aroma as she could. He put his arms around her, trying to comfort himself more than her, because he was so excited to see his pale-eyed beauty awake and apparently well enough to try to squeeze the air out of him. The closeness of her and a few tidbits of recently forgotten information, coupled with the fact that they had both survived their ordeal and were close to death, caused him to feel arousal take hold of his body. After what felt like minutes of the embrace, he dropped the piece of clean, discarded clothing next to him when he was tackled, and they came spiraling back to him bit by bit. Given the volume of blood leaking from his nasal cavity, the developing young woman next to him might have assumed he had an aneurysm if she had seen his face. In order to clean and dry her pants and tend to her severely bleeding wound, he had taken them off while she was unconscious. When he returned to the cave, he had just completed that. Even though he wouldn't publicly acknowledge it, his actions demonstrated that he was rapidly growing attracted to the girl he was holding. He left her underwear on despite the fact that she was without pants, but his anatomy still reacted. He croaked, Hinata. She leaned back to listen intently as she realized the boy she was holding was attempting to speak to her. When she looked at his face, she noticed a huge flush, which greatly perplexed her. Hinata was even more perplexed when Naruto let go of one arm and gestured toward the cave's floor. As she followed the movement, she saw a familiar piece of fabric on the ground. When she realized what the fabric was, her present outfit returned to her with all its intensity. The whole situation flashed into her mind, and blood rushed to her face. She immediately lowered herself into a crouch in an effort to further conceal herself, only to discover, much to her relief, that her underwear was still in place. During her initial examination of her clothing after waking, although she had previously been more nude in front of her crush, she now felt more self-conscious due to her increased sexual consciousness. She squeaked, "Thank you, Naruto-kun," as she got up from her kneeling position and grabbed her pants in order to give Hinata some privacy while she was putting her pants back on. Naruto swiftly turned around. I'm sorry," she whispered back. He replied, obviously perplexed, "Why are you sorry, Hinata-chan?" She began in a whisper that he could hear, but she swallowed hard at the thought of having to acknowledge her own weakness. "I wasn't able to do anything. I couldn't help you, and I even got myself injured. You had to save me again, didn't you? I should be the one to apologize, Hinata. It is because of me that you keep getting put in danger. You fled your home and family because of me, because of that mark," Naruto said. Blushing as he recalled how the mark had appeared, he sighed in relief, thinking she would despise him for the awkward situation they were in just now and the fact that he had to partially undress her. "That you would be hated if you returned. Now we're out here all alone, by ourselves, and I don't even fully understand where we are going." She muttered, "I would do it all again," hoping he wouldn't hear. "But why?" he inquired. "I may be young and don't have much experience in life, but the feeling that I have when I am with you I believe is love, Naruto-kun." She spoke a little louder, startling him, and then quickly turned away from him out of fear of being rejected. She had previously, but not so publicly, expressed her feelings for him, and Naruto stood there. He believed it to be merely in the moment, situation due to his own lack of life and emotional experience. He was unable to completely comprehend his feelings for her. He did know a few things, one of which was that he felt warm all over when he was close to her. He had to acknowledge that he felt strong, safe, and needed, and that a feeling of dread would overtake him when he was separated from her. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have spoken of such things. I was just my girlish fantasies taking a hold of me. Forget Iya," she said, interpreting his silence as a rejection. A pair of arms wrapped themselves around her from behind, cutting her off. He put his right arm over her right shoulder and his left arm around her midsection, causing her breath to catch in her throat. After shivering at the touch, her body eased into his warmth. He placed his chin on her right shoulder. I don't know much about love, but I know I always want you to be with me. He breathed deeply. You're not weak, Hinata. And certainly not a burden. I don't think I could have made it this far without you. As long as you're willing to be with me, we will push forward. We will become stronger together, train hard together, so something like what happened today doesn't happen again. With a sincere smile, she turned around in his arms and met his face. She looked into his eyes and almost fell into his arms. She nodded, pleased by his promise for the future and his partial confession. I would like that, Naruto-kun. Having never received a proper hug as a child, he drew her closer for a more intense embrace. He was dependent on the warmth that a loving person could provide. As soothing as it was, he gradually released her. There is still some night left and we are at the bottom of the cliffs. They shouldn't be able to find us down here, at least until tomorrow. We should get some sleep and head for the Eastern Peninsula beach at first light. Happy that he still desired to be with her, Hinata grinned at him. She said, all right, nodding. Satisfied with each other's company and the potential for the future, they started to get comfortable for the night. They both took comfort in the fact that they would be together to face the unknown, even though it was only a few hours away and would be marked by the rising sun. A journey. A lone man stood on the beaches of Yu Nounkuni, gazing out to the eastern seas. Disbelieving of what lay behind him, his lone eyes scanned the horizon. No longer was it his problem to solve. There had been a great deal of chaos in the village he had just passed through. Since the small nation was overrun by a business tycoon, it has descended into abject poverty. The majority of the population had fallen as low as their economy, but rumors from the filthy streets had only suggested that perhaps a small number of people still had hope for the future. In order to survive, many of the younger men are now turning to the tycoon's employment, committing crimes against their former friend system, even going so far as to commit murder in an effort to support their families or remove their legacies from the current environments. Women who were left on their own frequently had little left over to survive and turned to prostitution or selling their children. One could feel the desperation. He was a man who abandoned his home, and despite the appalling conditions, it was not his place to meddle. A home that would lie and leave a child to protect themselves from some of the horrors he had seen right behind him was a cruel joke. He was even more depressed about the world he was living in after hearing about the events he had just heard. He accepted his fate and let the winds carry him wherever they would. At the moment, they wanted to carry him across the ocean to a location he had only visited once. Although it wasn't the safest location, it was still much safer than simply traveling through the elemental nation's territories. He is a missing a ninja without a village, and he probably has a bounty on his head. Every bounty hunter would be vying for him now that he had no village affiliation, in addition to the fact that he was well known throughout the world as the ninja who had learned over 1,000 ninjutsu. Because the people there feared the ghosts that roamed through those ruins, the place where he was going was barren and devoid of human life. Even the most formidable ninja did not like the prospect of drawing their wrath for the crimes done to them. It would only be an inconvenience to his heart's suffering over the crimes he unintentionally committed against his sensei's son if he were to set foot on their cursed lands and be targeted by the voices of the past. He took a single step onto the water, placing his other foot in front of the last and using chakra to stay afloat. This marked the beginning of this man's journey back in time to atone for his transgressions. Leaving the fire, the sage never imagined that he would find himself in this predicament, particularly here. At the moment, he was seated on a comfortable couch in a waiting area while being watched with suspicion. In an attempt to maintain the appearance of intimidation and prevent him from trying anything amusing, the people around him stared at him intently. Perhaps the idea of their hands clutching the pommels of their blades would be enough. But the old man simply sat there calmly, as though the guards surrounding him were merely insects that you might often see on a wall, just waiting to be squashed. Most of the time, he was exhausted. He had hardly slept, eaten less, and had virtually forgotten his research since leaving the walls of Konoha. Indeed, he felt thinner, and not in a way that would indicate training for those outcomes, but rather as though aging had finally put its bony hands around him and begun to suck the life out of his weary bones. Suddenly, a woman walked and bowed before him as the door opposite him opened. The Tsuchikage will see you know Jiraiya-san. If he could get her alone, he would normally have leered at the woman and even asked her out for a drink in the hopes of seeing her bare breasts or perhaps more if he was lucky. However, he had changed from a few days prior when he stood up. The Anbu immediately crouched, clenching their weapons in preparation for an unexpected attack. His entourage remained by his side as the sage nodded and paid no attention as he walked to the door. The woman scowled as she turned away from him, somewhat shocked. From his well-known series, she had heard about the adventures of the Toad Sage, his perversion. His reputation preceded him, but he was rarely spotted in any Iwa-guarded area in an attempt to draw attention to herself. She had deliberately draped her top a bit more than usual so that it would hang and allow him to see her assets more clearly. However, there was no proof that he had even laid eyes on her in her heart. She hoped he would use her as a muse, a source of inspiration for some of his writing. Without making the usual small talk with the elderly man, Jiraiya entered the room and took the chair across from him. The man frowned, clearly offended. "Is this really necessary, Onokei?" he asked. The elderly gentleman replied with a grunt. "You have not set foot in this country since the war. Least of all to make pleasantries. What makes you think I would let my guard down while you appear now, seeking a favor you have yet to elaborate on?" His reply was, "The favor is personal in nature." However, in response, Onokei arched an eyebrow. "If it makes you feel any better, I give you my word as not only the great toad sage, but also on the grave of my former student Minato Namikaze that I mean no harm to you or your village." When the name of the dead Hokage was mentioned, one of the Anbu let out a growl. He mewed at what was said, and Onokei paused. The majority straightened and released their hands from their weapons after he gave them a brief nod, untrusting his cage's judgment. One Anbu said, "But sir, what about the attacks from the Leaf on our village?" "Attacks that took place nearly 15 years ago during the war. The war is over. Although the tensions are still high, we are somewhat at peace. You will do as I command and leave us be," the man with a bulbous nose said. Before they all disappeared, the man turned away and nodded to the others. "I need not remind you, Jiraiya, that you walk a fine line. Just being here, I may have granted you an exclusive audience with me, but do not take this as a friendly meeting. I need some information. I don't expect any help, but maybe you might be able to point me in the right direction," the wise man said. "You expect me to believe that with your vast spy network, that we still can't find traces of, needs to come see me for information," he said with disbelief. Jiraiya said, "I'm looking for someone." With a dejected tone he reached nervously into his vest and saw that Onokei was tense. He took out a picture, set it on the desk, and moved in the direction of the leader. "Try the graveyard in Konoha. I heard he is buried there," Onokei replied, chuckling after taking a quick look at the picture. "Why would you show me childhood photos of the man that nearly wiped out my armies?" "It is not Minato, Onokei," he remarked, sounding slightly amused. "Sure it is. I would recognize that blonde hair, blue eyes, and those whisker marks," Onokei said, picking up the picture. "What is the meaning of this?" Onokei asked in confusion. Jiraiya sighed deeply and braced himself for the answer. "It is his son." Was the only answer, which surprised Jiraiya. The only response Onokei needed was silence. Seeing this, he went on, "What? Did you expect me to be outraged? Or maybe to send massive military forces and assassination squads into Konoha to capture or kill his progeny?" He laughed. "Despite what you may have thought, I am an honorable man. As much as I hate to admit it, so was Namikaze-san. Yes, he killed hundreds of my shinobi, but we were at war. Lives were lost, families destroyed, and despite my distaste at the outcome, it was because of his brilliance and tenacity that forced us back." Onokei took a moment to breathe and think about his past. "I will be the first to admit there still is some animosity with some of the older generations for what has been done in the past, more precisely against your former Hokage, but you don't get to be our ages in a shinobi world by clinging to such hatreds." It is also not a surprise that he had a child. There are still recon photos from the field during the war that women keep and fantasize over. For the first time in more than a week, Jiraiya grinned at that. It was nostalgic to speak so highly of his cherished pupil, especially with a former adversary. "We were under that impression, yes," he replied. "About possible assassination attempts, not the photo circulations of course," he laughed. A closer look at the picture reminded me of the whisker lines, and the elderly man grinned almost sneeringly. The alleged question left Jiraiya's mouth hanging open. "I take it he is the Jinchuriki as well? Come now, O great toad sage. You are not the only one with a spy network. We knew that Kushina was the vessel for the Kyuubi and that there was a romance between the two during the war. After the war ended, we were too busy rebuilding and reports from inside Konoha began to dwindle and nothing was ever mentioned of their marriage or about being with child. We did know that with her death and the attack of the Kyuubi that another vessel was needed, but by that time our sources within your village dwindled or defected and we couldn't gain any information on the new host." Onokei no grinned at the sage. "My real question though is, how does the self-proclaimed strongest of the hidden villages lose their Jinchuriki?" The Jiraiya's face lit up with shame because he knew that if he wanted to continue searching for his godson, he would have to recount his past. Jiraiya reached into his vest once more and took out a file folder, setting it on the desk. "I suppose since you have already put two and two together there is no harm in showing you this." Onokei grabbed the file and started to look through its pages abruptly. A short man's anger made the ground tremble when he read that file. A shout that escaped him echoed through the village and into the gorges and mountains of the surrounding areas. Men hurried in with their weapons drawn as the office door flew open as the short leader's shriek shattered the atmosphere as the toad sage sat in his chair. The elite group of operatives swiftly circled him thanks to their practiced training as the Tsuchikage tried to control his rage. The cries of rage began to fade. "Onokei-sama, what happened?" Before he trusted his voice, he took deep, ragged breaths and waited to recover from his adrenaline-induced outburst. He snarled at his guard. "Get out of my office now and don't come back until I call you personally." He looked at the sage, who was obviously ashamed, and waited until they had left the room again. "Everything, I want to know everything." He croaked, "I wouldn't know where to begin." He narrowed his beady eyes and said, "Try from the beginning." He could feel the pain and despair draining from him as he looked at the man across from him. "You could feel it in the air." With a sigh, he went on, "I will have some sake brought for us while you gather your thoughts." He pressed the button on his secretary's intercom and said, "Bring me a bottle of sake." Turning to face Jiraiya, "Make it 6 bottles." In an attempt to lighten the mood in light of recent events and revelations, he lets a tiny smile slip through his lips as he says to the broken man in front of him, "Poison-free of course, just this one time." A laugh leaped out of his throat. He would never have thought that he would at least try to strike up a friendly conversation with a village leader that they had destroyed in the last war, and he was surprisingly relieved that his suspicions about the oldest Kage were unjustified. "It started about 13 years ago," he began, letting out a deep sigh. After 36 hours, the couple was lost in the darkness after the sun had set a few hours earlier. They had borrowed a boat from a small fishing village in the southeast Kaminari no Kuni Peninsula 24 hours prior. They felt bad about it, but the voiced tug in his head told him that they had to do it to keep themselves safe at sea. The voice that had been directing the blonde had instructed him to row and pointed them in a single direction. They are tossed from side to side by the water as it beats the side of their small boat 12 hours later while they are in the dark. Their stomachs had already been completely cleared by the onset of nausea. They sat in the middle of the ship, clinging to one another for as long as they could live, and praying to whatever god would hear them. The boat was tossing, and the waves washing above the side soaked their clothes. They would have to take a break from each other's warmth every few minutes in order to save the collection of potentially fatal liquid, only to have it come back a few seconds later. Hinata screamed, "Naruto-kun, we can't keep this up the whole night," over the wind's shrieks. In an attempt to soothe her, the blonde pulled her closer, but more salt water washed over them. Given the gravity of the situation and his own desperation, he said, "You won't have to, Hinata-chan." If her teeth weren't chattering so loudly, she would sigh in relief at his declaration. She looked worried when she finally understood what he had said and what it meant. She shook her head, saying, "No, Naruto-kun, you can't do it by yourself either. I will help as well." Naruto took off her jacket without her knowing what he was doing. In an attempt to keep her as dry and warm as possible, he quickly took out a waterproof poncho from his pack and threw it over her after wrapping her in a travel cloak. "We will take turns," he made clear as Hinata attempted to warm up. He picked up the bait bucket that was in the boat and started to drain the water once more as she looked at him. He tried to be as comforting as he could by smiling and saying, "At least it couldn't be any worse. Just try to relax and get some rest if possible. I will wake you later so you can help again." He seemed to regret the words he used, as though he were tempting fate. A lightning bolt arced across the sky as he was leaving his mouth, illuminating the entire area. To his complete horror, he glanced quickly at the sky and saw nothing but crashing waves and endless rolling clouds in the dark sky. A girlish shriek was heard all around the area. As soon as the thunder struck, Hinata would have laughed at the blonde's expense if it weren't for their current situation. Sleep was ebbing into her mind, and she was beginning to feel somewhat warm with the extra layers her crush had forced upon her. She was sure that if something came up that needed more assistance, her companion would wake her for her turn even as the boat was jostled by the waves. Her eyelids gradually began to droop, but sleep still gripped her. Island of Graveyard's knees struck the smooth sand of a beach that had been devoid of human habitation for decades with a thud. The remainder of the attached body lay on the sandy horizon, and gasping breaths were audible. It had been a while since he had embarked on such a journey. Even the most skilled ninja found it exhausting to perform a task that required constant use of his chakra, like water walking across a large body of water. At this point, he was especially pleased with his proficiency in the fundamentals. After resting for a few minutes, his body found the current position comfortable, despite the sand getting into awkward places. However, he was startled out of his reverie when the sound barrier broke. A short distance away, Kakashi could make out the distant shapes of thunderclouds as he looked eastward along the southern beach, as though a bad omen were visible in its formation over the waters. A dark sky was forming out over the water as he looked at the natural formations. The distant storm lit up in the sky. A few seconds later, the looming shockwave appeared, followed by lightning. The cycloptic shinobi, exhausted, pushed himself off the ground and placed his hands underneath himself. There was a storm approaching, which could mean catastrophe for these islands. A sane person would be inclined to seek refuge in the neighboring village. There were plenty of homes in the village that could be used as shelter from the weather, despite the fact that no one lived on the island anymore. Fortunately, Kakashi was smarter than the most sane person, and he began to lumber toward the nearby forest. The village under observation was Uzushiogakure, which remains a mystery to this day. One would probably become a part of the Somber Da copyright corps that had developed in the ruins following the Second Shinobi World War if they were unaware of the island's history or its residents. The bleached bones of the most renowned clan in this land, though they were mainly dispersed throughout the ruins, made it dangerous to walk through the village. This village was founded by the Uzumaki, the clan of his sensei's wife, who is now his sensei's son's given name instead of Namikaze. They continue to be renowned as the leading authorities on fuinjutsu throughout the elemental nations. It was almost regarded as a keki genki by most. The village's founders had set up booby traps on the island to thwart their enemy during the invasion by several nations. As the invasion came to an end and the people would inevitably fall, they also set up fuinjutsu traps all over the village to safeguard their secrets and keep scavengers from trying to take their legacy. It would be fatal for him to enter the village at this time due to his chakra exhaustion. Even though he had a significant advantage due to his exceptional vision, using it to enter the village would further tax his already limited resources. He would take temporary refuge for the time being, just long enough to protect him from the elements that might hit the island due to the approaching storm, until he was sufficiently rested to go into the village in search of a more permanent home. Tower of Hokage. The wait was almost as painful as the time that passed before he could achieve his goals. Ultimately, this was meant to be a step toward realizing those goals. He was waiting for the next step on a bench outside a large set of doors after completing a long and difficult journey to reach his first goal. What on earth do they believe they are? He asked no one a specific question. The idea of joining a team made him feel betrayed, and he couldn't help but be angry at the bureaucratic procedure that has impeded his advancement. The secretary said to the lone person in the hallway, "You might see the Hokage now." With a sigh, he stood up and moved toward the office doors in front of him, not even bothering to respond to the woman's statement with a respectable answer. He was about to knock on the hardened wood when he heard the word, "Enter," uttered from beyond the door before his knuckles touched it. As if he had been on active duty during the last Great War, he hurriedly pushed the doors open and closed after entering the office and assuming his place at the front of his leader's desk. The elderly man in front of him had all the answers he needed, so he wasn't a fool. The main focus of his queries was his lack of team placement. He kept his head up, never really looking at the man, but just slightly over his head and through the window behind him, into the wide blue sky. Waiting for the man in the hat to speak to him was almost as mind-numbing as sitting on the bench outside the office. The elderly man started, Sasuke Uchiha, I am happy you could make it here. I know I was supposed to meet you earlier, but I ask that you forgive me. I had some pressing matters to attend to now. You are probably more curious by now as to why you have not been placed within a team." When asked, "Yes, Hokage-sama," he finally looked the man in the eyes. He wanted to shrink back at what he saw behind that desk when he finally made eye contact. He had visited the Hokage before, and in the 10 years since his last encounter with the aging leader, he seemed to have added another decade to his already dwindling life expectancy. Knowing that his appearance must have been a shocking sight, Hiruzen saw the surprise in the young boy's eyes. Due to the recent events, he had been sleeping very little and thinking a lot about what had happened in just the past week. "You will have to accept my most sincere apologies, Sasuke. In light of recent information, there was no longer another persons available to complete another team for your placement. As such, I had planned on having you taking an apprenticeship with a very well-renowned shinobi." The boy appeared to raise his height by almost an inch and puff out his chest in pride as he stood a little taller after hearing the news. It wasn't until the words were finally processed in his mind that he understood the elder's meaning. "Pardon, Hokage-sama?" The Hokage swiftly clarified after noticing the misunderstanding in his voice. "Excuse me, my boy, I did not mean to word that so poorly. The plan remains the same, but the instructor I had in mind is currently indisposed at the moment and will not be available to take you under his wing instead. However, I have found a suitable replacement that should prove just as efficient." He released a held breath, relieved that his training regimen would not be left to his own devices. In fact, the idea of having a personal trainer and sensei had given his sense of superiority a little boost. His teacher would be able to concentrate on him alone instead of having to split his time between 3 pupils, which would enable him to advance more quickly. Since he was the final Uchiha, special attention should be paid to his abilities in order to further his objectives and improve the village. The words, "Enter," were spoken again by the man in front of Sasuke, who was abruptly dispelled from his thoughts. The boy's head turned slightly as he heard the door open and saw a man enter from behind. At first look, he didn't seem particularly noteworthy. The way he carried himself gave the impression that he was stiff and not very powerful, given that nobody would wear sunglasses indoors and that the bandana was so dumb. The boy nearly wanted to snort at what he saw. The man stood beside the student and bowed slightly to his commander in a manner that was almost robotic. "Sasuke, I would like to introduce you to your new personal sensei, Ebisu-san. I would like you to meet your newest student, Sasuke Uchiha." The man in question scowled as he turned to Sasuke to measure him. "Sasuke, I am most pleased to meet you. From this moment forward you would only address me as sensei. You will only speak when asked to, and must do everything I ask without question with the utmost due diligence. Do you understand?" "Hi sensei." He bowed as he turned to face his new teacher. "Good, now that introductions are complete, you will meet me at the front of the academy tomorrow morning at 7 in the morning. From this moment on we will be advancing your training, starting with the basics." Finally, to get their full attention, the leader clapped his hands and said, "Good luck, and you are both dismissed now that this matter is settled." With a swift wave of his hand, he waved them away and waited for them to leave his office so he could resume his paperwork. A remote offshore, he opened his eyes groggily. He had been forced into the real world by the unpleasant glare of the sun that was forcing through his eyelids. The blonde began to look around, saying, I'm in too much pain for this to be heaven." He was flipped over by a wave, and the last thing he remembered was bailing out the boat. When he realized she wasn't beside him, he yelled, "Hinata-chan." As the boat crashed into his head as he was trying to reach her, he hurried to his feet, momentarily forgetting his own wounds, and glanced around. He yelled, "Hinata-chan," once more. As he spun in circles, he soon discovered that he was on a beach, that there was a forest inland, and that there were numerous what he thought were marine animals on the beach. The sand was littered with fish and odd-looking stars from the edge of the forest to the sound of the waves. There was an odd sea plant. There were wooden planks scattered everywhere, probably the remains of their sturdy ship. "Hinata-chan," he exclaimed again. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of a green pulsing movement out of the corner of his eye. There was an unusual movement where he had seen a big heap of sea vegetation. It raised a ooh sound. The boy shouted, "A mew monster," pointing to the groaning mass of vegetation. "Hinata, if you can hear me, run for safety. I will hold it off," he said, frozen in place as he watched the entity emerge from the sand. He was standing there getting ready to fight the creature as it got closer to its maximum height. "Kun!" it screamed. "Kun!" it cried once more. The blonde was surprised to hear that it sounded like it was in pain. He approached the beast slowly, still on the defensive. The seaweed that covered the monster's body began to slip away from it. "Kid, please relax. This is not a place to be afraid." "How are you able to say that? It's not as you believe." The creature lifted an arm with a delicate hand and took off its head covering as the enigmatic voice was speaking. When the head of indigo hair was finally revealed, Naruto's eyes widened as he realized what the voice was attempting to convey. He shouted, "Hinata-chan," loudly. When he finally caught sight of her face, he turned to the voice, ran, and relieved her by sweeping her off her feet. Knowing that her crush was touching her made her shiver with pleasure as she was held in such a tight embrace. She was definitely pressing against him with her heel, and vice versa. As he twirled her around, she began to feel dizzy, and then her dreams came crashing down when her feet hit the sand once more. "I'm so glad you're okay, Hinata-chan," he said. "I thought I lost you when that wave hit us." She looked around and said, "Where are we, Naruto-kun?" He looked around once more, following her lead, and said, "I don't know. There is no reason for concern here. We are just where we should be." He asks mockingly, "In the middle of the ocean on a deserted island?" "We're at home, that's all." The beach began to tremble beneath their feet as soon as they heard a rumble from farther inland. The blonde asked, "No one in particular. What is that? Do you recall that I told you not to be afraid of this situation?" He said out loud, "Yes, without realizing it. I retract it. You may want to feel fear, terrified." A tree fell close by, hitting the ground and burying the trunk 10 feet below the spot where he had just finished speaking. The trees at the forest's edge parted as the missile's shockwave passed, and a huge white fox emerged, peering down at them. "I believe I have a few things to clarify. Hunting foxes." The elderly gentleman glanced down at his drink, wondering if something had been added without his knowledge. It was clear, as one might expect from the liquid he was drinking at the moment. Then he reached for the bottle from which the contents had come and sniffed, still smelling of a fine rice wine with a touch of sweet plum. He shouldn't be affected this much by the fact that they were currently on their last bottle of 6. Ultimately, he had only drank roughly one of the 5 bottles, whereas his guest had drank the majority. There was no way the story he had been told could be true. Nobody ought to have made it through that. For those who experienced the last war and were held captive in a prisoner camp, the life he was told sounded even more horrific. Even if he lived to his own age, He would not have survived long enough to witness such horrors. The fact that all of the heinous acts were committed against a single person in less than 13 years made it much worse. In contrast, even though he was small in stature, he was a battle-hardened man. He was still tempted to eat his breakfast, lunch, and dinner all at once, as he had done for the past week. "That cannot be true," the man nearly demanding, he said, refusing to accept such stories. "I assure you, every bit of it is true. I thought the same as you at one point. You have to ask yourself, would I be here, asking for your help if I was not serious about this?" Jiraiya responded. Children were expected to sustain cuts, bruises, and broken bones as they grew up. Rape and molestation are frequent among people from dysfunctional households. Those who reside in the criminal underground are known to suffer from mutilations and potentially fatal injuries. However, this boy had survived a painless field vivisection, having his organs removed and dissected before rescuers could reach him. He was only 10 years old when that incident occurred. A Jinchuriki's life was dangerous, and Onokei had always known that. Two of them had allegiance to his village. They never experienced such mistreatment. They had terrible lives. If they had been subjected to such cruelty, they probably would have passed away long ago. The Kyuubi had amazing healing abilities. However, it was mind-blowing to do such a thing to a child who was practically royalty in his own village. He is probably the last member of the Uzumaki clan to still be alive. He was the son of the 4th Hokage when the village fell. His mother was the Azukage's youngest daughter. Naruto would be the heir to the entire island and the final key to unlocking all of its treasures if it were true that her siblings had passed away. Somberly, "I see," he said. He pondered what he had been told for a long few minutes. Whether the child was the son of his rival or not, his heart did genuinely care for him. He still had a village to worry about, so before he takes action, anything he plans to do must benefit them. "After telling me all this, what do you expect to accomplish?" Toad Sage. "I just ask for your awareness," he said. In response, he asked, "So just our eyes are all you want? Then we would inform you of his last known location?" he asked, nodding. When Jiraiya said, "I would be in your debt if you would do as much." The elderly man hummed to himself, "And if we should say, find him and offer him asylum, housing, food, possibly a prominent position within the village?" he finally said after he had an idea. The sage was not concerned at this point because he was aware of the scope of the open-ended question. "Then please do, as long as you inform me of his whereabouts and he wants to be here, then I have no objection to his happiness." The older of the two finally grinned. "Then I will do what we can immediately. Word will be passed out immediately to all patrols and those on missions to be on the lookout for anyone who fits his description of that of his companion. Upon identification, we will not look to harm but proceed to bring them to the village and treat them with the greatest hospitality." "Thanks, old man," Jiraiya said as she got to her feet and bowed to him. Onokei complained about being referred to as old, but she ignored it. "I will even let you stay the night here to rest up as a senior guest in my village before you set off tomorrow in search for your godson." "You are too kind, and I would be delighted to take your kindness," he said, turning to the door after bowing once more before heading to a hotel. "One more thing, Jiraiya, if the Sanin, don't think about going to the hot springs during your stay here," he went on. "My granddaughter frequents them and I would really like to avoid a misunderstanding as to why she melted a living legend such as you." After noticing the man stop in his tracks as though he was in a freeze frame, the sage gulped loudly, nodded, and left through the door. A man emerged from the shadows and said, "Are you sure this is okay, sir? It is a gamble if we find the boy or not, but the Sanin is not a threat to us at this point. He is more concerned with finding his godson than he is about playing politics or super spy. He should be able to mind his P, S and Q, S." Onokei then considered all the opportunities that might arise if he were successful in locating the child before anybody else. That would undoubtedly shift the Great Five's power dynamics in his favor. The dash around this was the moment when Kurenai was lost. How the team had passed the secondary test was a mystery to her. It was a disaster-made team. Her support was constantly at odds with her front line. She was a discreet and quiet long-range person. Although Shino had so far relegated himself to a supporting role, she hoped he would help balance out the personalities of the other two. Since her introductions, the two troublesome kids in question had been at each other's throats. It all began when Kiba made a divisive remark regarding Sakura's one true love. She was impulsive and easily agitated, frequently losing concentration when something was presented to her that she didn't agree with at the start of his hormonal changes. Kiba was just like any other boy who had just become a ninja, proud, arrogant, impulsive, and insensitive to others. This frequently caused him to experience pain from Sakura. The task for yesterday was to paint a fence. "Sasuke would like you better with any other color hair than pink," the obnoxious boy said proudly after spilling a pail of white wash on the equally obnoxious girl. Can you imagine having boys whose hair was pink? Enemy shinobi would die laughing at them in the field. Maybe that is the point. And your offspring will be Konoha's new secret weapon, he said, laughing uncontrollably. As he reveled in his humor, his female teammate was rapidly becoming enraged. Kiba would eventually have to go to the hospital for head trauma and a turpentine bath to get rid of the last of the whitewash. It would take a tremendous amount of imagination to describe their teamwork as the sensei she was watching from a tree. The goal was to find the cat that belonged to the daimyo's wife. They had set up a cage trap after luring it to an ally. The animal was captured with little difficulty, and the plan had surprisingly gone off without a hitch. The team moved in to physically take possession of the cat while it was safely contained in the cage. Everything went wrong at that point. Kiba had made a sarcastic comment to their female teammate as they were getting close to the entrance, and in retaliation, she had pushed him into the cage by himself with the beast that was now tearing at his face. The real ninja's journey as the enormous beast stalked toward Naruto and Hinata. They remained motionless despite its deliberate pace. It didn't take long considering its size. The two quickly realized they were not on friendly ground as their eyes narrowed and their teeth bared, though she hoped they would live past this. Hinata took Naruto's hand in hers, reasoning that if this was their end, she would prefer it to be together. The fox, which was clearly not pleased with the intruders on its property, took a deep breath as it approached and continued to growl. The closer it came, the more slather dripped from its mouth. Anticipating the quick snack when the nose tip was about 10 feet away from the two, it took another deep breath and snorted in a way that resembled a sneeze. What are you doing here? The hackles went up, and the atmosphere of threat grew even more. The two humans were so taken aback by the speech that they nearly missed it. Although they were aware that some people could converse with animals, the Inuzuka being a prime example. They had never heard of an animal that could speak, but it was certainly not what one would expect to find a monstrous wild fox on an unexplored island. Kit. Fearfully, Naruto asked himself, what? The threat in front of him had nearly drowned out his inner voice. Inform her that you are on this island because of the Kyuubi. He asked incredulously, the Kyuubi? The Kyuubi is dead. There is no way it will believe it. Wait a moment, it's her. Look, she can smell me through you, and that's the only reason you haven't been digested yet. You don't have time to explain everything right now, so just tell her. The blonde said, the Kyuubi sent us to this island. Once more the fox appeared surprised. After she finished speaking, she took another deep breath, causing his clothes to lift from his body as she leaned closer until her nose was just inches from his face. The vixen sneered. Why would the great Kurama send two defenseless kids to this holy island and not be present himself? To receive training in the shinobi's actual methods, his voice answered. To learn from the kitsune, to protect, to right the wrongs done to them. I'm not saying that I don't even know what half of that means, Naruto replied. The voice came back, just repeat what I say, don't argue. To train in the true ways of the shinobi, to learn from the kitsune, to protect and right the wrongs that have been done to them, he said with dread. What is the location of my friend, Kyuubi no Yoko? She inquired. I can really smell him on you, like he's right beside us. I have a seal on him that keeps him safe, the voice said. I am repeating him right now. Naruto began, then paused in complete shock. He is safe and held within a seal on MMA. What the hell are you going on about? It's a long story, and if you want, I can explain it to you in the very near future, but for now, you have to follow my instructions. He went on, letting out a sigh to calm his nerves at the potential disclosure and attempting to ignore it for the time being given the dire ominousness that was staring at them. It is him who I am repeating right now. Are you really inside this child, Kurama? The fox inquired. At the command of his inner voice, Naruto raised his shirt and shaped his chakra. To their astonishment, the two teenagers saw a seal. A Uzumaki, she said, almost incredulously. I get it. What about this human girl you brought with you, anyway? Hinata. CC, could you show her, the mark? Naruto turned to Hinata after more internal prodding and a deep flush. Before realizing what he was asking, Hinata gave her blonde crush a strange look when she saw his head turn in shame. She pulled her shirt up to reveal her bra and let the beast see her developing breast. As shy as always, she immediately repositioned herself as soon as she thought the monster fox looked good enough to justify its needs. Alright, I've seen and heard enough for now. We'll talk about this in the den further back. Stay silent and follow me. The fox then pivoted on its heels and headed back through the dense forest. Naruto, who was still holding Hinata's hand, began to drag her along as he attempted to make sense of the situation, ostensibly with the help of his inner demon. What the hell is going on? After 3 weeks, when the man with the red hair said, I find this entire meeting very intriguing. I'm sorry to have disturbed you or taken you away from your duties. Kage-sama, I do hope I haven't been such an inconvenience, the wise man replied. Do not be concerned about such things at this moment. After all, our villages are allies, are they not? The man said, closing his eyes in contemplation. When Jiraiya no longer felt that his allegiance belonged to Konoha, he recoiled at the mention of Sunagakure and his own village being allies. That there, he went on, hoping the cage didn't notice, I hope that the treaty will prosper well into the future. The man put on a straight face and said, what I find intriguing about this meeting though is that you are not the only Sannin I have seen in the last week in conference. The sage exclaimed, Tsunade has been here. He would now have to look at something else he hadn't previously considered his old teammate, but she might be a useful source for locating his young godson. She had been informed that her niece Kushina and her son had perished in the Kyuubi attack. But one fact made him shudder at the thought of requesting her help at last. He would have to be honest with her. The man came back and said, I never said it was her. Orochimaru. The man with the white hair snarled. What did he want? With a calculating glance, the cage said, a proposition as it was, but that is a personal matter between him and my village, but I am currently curious why a second one has shown up in my village in the same week. That indicated that the slippery Sannin had probably left the area after a week. No matter what he has promised, you would regret what comes out in the end. Without hesitation, he asked, and you could make me a better offer than what he has. Jiraiya gave the man a fierce look and asked, what has he promised? I would rather not say, but I will tell you it was very enticing, he said in a mysterious way. The sage hoped that this man's request would be within his means. Then I will counter you, name the price, and I will do whatever I can within my capabilities. My payment will not cost you the price I could imagine that would come with Orochimaru's. My only request is that you cease all dealings with him and you hear my request. His support from his home was, he was certain, at best arduous and, most likely, totally severed. The man on the other side of him paused for a long moment, wondering what he was being offered and how much trust he could place in the famous Toad Sage. The Onokei inhaled deeply before saying, in keeping with conversation with your counterpart, I will tell you of our woes. Under extreme confidentiality, of course. He detested doing it again because he had already done it with the Snake Sannin. Financially, the village is near collapse, as you are familiar with the working of the village. The financial backing of the village comes from the missions it takes in. Currently our demand in the missions request is at an abysmal low. Our strength is being questioned. Jiraiya questioned, what about your strength is in question? As you obviously know, each of the 5 major villages has a Jinchuriki Maya. Our Jinchuriki has been unstable. Our daimyo has been concerned with his stability. He has killed and shows very little emotion toward anyone, including his family. The sage questioned, this is the cause of the outside mission requests? He was familiar with village life. There were 2 types of missions. Internal and external. Although there were frequently many requests from within the village, they were merely money that was moving in a stagnant manner and prevented the village from becoming more prosperous without the money coming in from outside sources. The majority of those funds were provided by their individual daimyos. The cage did not say, I am sad to say that it is my belief this is likely the cause, but rather the man did. He had to ask, can you tell me what has caused the instability within your Jinchuriki? A glimmer of hope came into the man's eyes. A man who was widely recognized as the finest seal master in all the elemental nations sat across from his desk. Unlike Konoha, we do not have anyone that is truly talented in the sealing arts. The seal that keeps the Biju at bay is weak. It has caused instability within his psyche. He is unable to sleep and the Biju continuously talks to him. Jiraiya did not fail to notice that his eyes were watering. It seems as if he believes the Biju is his mother. His mother had died very shortly after his birth. He probably knew, and the cage was correct, a key component of the person's mental capacity was the seal that was applied to Jinchuriki. He was unable to come up with a single well-known seal master in the land of Wind who could be utilized to create a Jinchuriki at this time. In that sense, he was not even a master according to his knowledge. The seal used on his godson was the best example of Fuinjutsu he had ever seen, and it was made by his student. I suppose you would like me to look at this seal, and see if I can strengthen it in the Jinchuriki's benefit? He received his response with a brief nod. That is MMA this village's primary concern, in addition to a second requirement that I would consider a personal favor. In addition to that, I would like you to meet with our daimyo personally and convey the concerns of this village and reinforce the needs of this village on the missions coming from the capital. He knew he would have to comply if he wanted the cage to listen to his requests. The only reason he would do it would be to prevent his old teammate from establishing himself anywhere. The demise of innocence. The sound of heavy panting came from the bushes. Her pointed canines jutted out from her mouth as her thin lips drew back farther up her muzzle. She could smell the sweat dripping from her prey's body. So hiding from her was pointless. He was simple to follow because of the earthy scent of the dirt covering his body and the salty undertone. That's what he desired. She could never deny him, and she was never one to do so. She was still a slave to his desires even after all this time apart. As instructed, she would keep training the kids. She snapped her jaws shut and jumped into the bush, shouting, "You must calm yourself." As she stepped inside, A blur emerged from the bush. The speed at which he could move was almost unexpected. He seemed to be partially a fox himself. The pun that went through her mind made her laugh deep in her throat. She sped off in the direction the blur was going. With these two, she had a lot of work to do. She had no idea what she was getting herself into when they met on the beach a few weeks prior, and her suspicions about her partner were validated. These two were completely misinformed about what a ninja was. She existed when ninjas existed, even though she wasn't present when ninshio was created. Although the boy's concept of protection and strength building was based on the teachings, his approach and ideas were completely based on a fanciful story. Ninjas were supposed to be cunning, sneaky, and dishonest. The greatest tools of a ninja were moral depletion, deceit, and working in the shadows. Being dishonest to your adversaries was a way of life. Even though she had been separated from people since the Great Biju Hunt, she was unable to comprehend how the traditional ways of life had evolved into the current ninja teachings. It was worse with the girl. She was shy, frail, and incredibly compassionate. The blonde was clearly the object of her infatuation. If not, it was a deep-seated love. Her skin bearing the mate mark was a huge surprise in the kitsune. It was a highly guarded technique. She was unable to comprehend why her partner had decided to reveal it in order to save the girl. That would have to wait until she was able to speak with her partner and the boy was able to communicate with her true love by accessing his innermost thoughts. Soon, that training would begin. For the time being, she was getting closer to where he was, about 30 meters away from her victim. She came to a stop on a branch to check if she was following him. He was scanning the trunk to get his attention. She let out a low growl in her throat. His breath caught in his throat as he turned his head quickly to face her. The woman sighed, "Remember your teachings, deception and misdirection." Another big fox jumped toward the boy from a tree to his left. As she was saying that, the boy turned his head in the direction of his impending death. Just as the fox was about to land in midair, the local birds took to the skies. Shortly after, a scream rang out through the forest. The life of a hermit. A man stepped out into the ocean air as the door to the beachside cottage opened with the purifying atmosphere that was a common constant in this part of the world. His mind was clear even though his heart was heavy with internal turmoil. The tiny house was set against the backdrop of the village, which was a reminder of the atrocities committed by people. The man was reminded of everything he had lost in his life by the ruins. The wife of his mentor came from this run-down area. When he needed it most, the same mentor who served as a big brother and offered wise counsel. When his father passed away, his wife comforted him and was like a mother to him. He turned away from the village to look across the water, realizing that his heart was not in a state to consider such feelings. As the sun rose, his gaze began in the east and gradually shifted across the horizon to the west. If he had enough chakra, he might be able to make it to the islands of Yu Nounkuni by traveling east. The place where he had lived was in the west, packed with people he cared about. For the most part, one would think that he would have been well liked by the locals since he was one of the strongest shinobi in the village. In hindsight, he hardly ever engaged with people outside of missions. He mostly spent his time by himself, though occasionally he would go to a bar and simply display his face to let people know he was still alive. What he would miss most about leaving the village was the memorial stone bearing the names of his former teammates, his sensei, and his wife. He began to question whether the Hokage had fulfilled his threat to mark him as missing nin as he thought about his former home. After all, unless they passed away or suffered an injury that prevented them from continuing to be a shinobi, no one simply stopped being one. Hindsight is 20/20, as they say. Since he was on a deserted island and nobody could possibly know where he was, he wouldn't have to worry about that. It was the ideal setting for self-reflection and acknowledgement of one's own shortcomings. In Kakashi's case, he had committed numerous errors. He would never try to leave the island again for a very long time. Particular delivery. After the conclusion of the elders' meeting, Kiyoshi went back to his office. The clan elders had been in a frenzy for the past few weeks following the disappearance of his eldest daughter. There was a strong push for Hanabi to be recognized as the clan's heir right away and to be trained in the clan's renowned taijutsu. Additionally, they had loudly expressed their displeasure with the measures being taken to protect his oldest child and the Byakugan's secrets as if they had disappeared from the elemental nations. Their search teams have found nothing so far. He wiped his face while seated at his desk because he was becoming overwhelmed by the pressures of leadership. He took note of the fresh reports from the squads that were still searching in the field when his gaze finally settled on his desk. A small scroll with a somewhat familiar seal of wax was also on his desk. He picked up the object, examined the scroll more closely, and eventually identified the seal. It came from Yu Nounkuni, a resort his family had frequented while his wife was still living. Since he no longer traveled there, he would have terminated the clan's contract with the company, but the council advised him to keep the tab open and operational for clan purposes since no Hyuga, council or otherwise, had visited Yu Nounkuni in recent years. He was at a loss as to why he would be receiving an invoice from the resort in the interest of security. The clan always documented the travels of its members, even if they were on a mission. He opened the parchment and read the contents after breaking the wax seal. Before the bill was presented, the top was merely a friendly greeting. He quickly scrolled down to see the total, and the amount there left his mouth hanging open. He clenched his jaw and went back to the detailed list of charges to see what would cost so much. Perhaps he could figure out who had chosen to go shopping under the alias Hyuga. Check out the 2-bedroom room, verify the meals that come with the accommodations, check the dry cleaning, numerous brand new outfits, a ninja Medea youth. Check out the ninja basic weaponry, check out the ninja issue. Survival supplies. A cog in his mind finally slipped as he read the last few lines of the itemized list, and a realization struck him like a ton of bricks. According to his accounts, Yu Nounkuni contained both his daughter and the demon dressed in human skin. He quickly grabbed a piece of parchment and began writing. He immediately called out to a servant. While he was doing this, the servant bowed to her clan head as soon as the door opened and remained there until she was recognized. Hiyashi beckoned her forward after finishing. Take this missive and copy it so each of our field parties will receive one. Then I want you to send the information on the fastest birds we have to said parties. The woman said, "Hi Hiyashi-sama," and then she quickly fled out the door. Once more alone in his office, he hastily concealed the invoice scroll he needed to prevent the spread of this information. The Hokage would send parties into the area if he learned of the demon boy's whereabouts, and they would probably be discovered before the clan could address the matter. An unfinished task after the difficult experience he had just gone through, the man sagged into the couch. To say it was a terrible task would be an understatement. He was exhausted from checking the Ichibi Jinchuriki's seal. The Kazekage and Lady Chiyo, Tsunade's rival in Suna, were there as a precaution. Fortunately, the boy consented to take a mild sedative that made his muscles unresponsive but allowed him to stay awake. Additionally, a side effect of the drug had reduced the boy's chakra to the point where any normal person would likely die if any more were to leave him. He chuckled when he saw the seal for what it was. He requested to see the actual seal, assuming they were kidding. He was horrified to discover that the only thing preventing the insane sand raccoon from leveling the entire area was what he was staring at. A group of monkeys with a box of crayons and enough time could have created a better seal than the one applied to the red-headed boy, he said in complete awe. He became even more aware that Lady Chiyo was less skilled than a family of monkeys when she leapt at him in an attempt to attack. Jiraiya started working after the woman was led out of the room. To the surprise of the Kazekage watching, he quickly applied a counter seal to the existing one, rendering the boy unconscious, and then went to work. It was never pleasant to see Agera sleeping, but this time he appeared content. Beginning with a fresh seal, the Sannin proceeded to meticulously write on the boy's chest. The man persisted as the hours passed, his eyes still displaying unwavering resolve. By the time he finished writing the scripts, he had created a 5-pronged seal with overlapping concentric circles, each of which only covered roughly 25% of the one before it. Jiraiya retreated after finishing the tiresome task and approached a table with a platter of food on it. "Is that it?" inquired the Kazekage. The toad sage snatched up a bottle of sake to wash it down after swallowing an onigiri and shaking his head. "That was just the development of the seal. I just need to take a short break because the hard part is coming up." The Kazekage had to wonder what the difficult part might be after taking another look at the seal. "There is more to it than that. I cannot even understand 90% of the scribbles there." Jiraiya, for his part, could only chuckle. "The seal still needs to be activated. I need your assistance with that." After another swig, he set the bottle down and, as if swallowing it whole, picked up another rice ball and threw it into his mouth. "The other seals must be removed before I can activate the new seal," he said, approaching the boy once more. He went on after noticing the man's anxious expression. "The counter seal I placed on him has a binding script that will release and delete the original seal. When that one is released, it alleviates the need to unwrite the original. That could take longer than we have time for. When I give you signal, I need you to release the seal before I can activate the new one. If you do it too soon, we die when the Biju is released. If you do it too late, he dies when the seals meld and destroys his chakra coils. On second thought, that may kill us as well too." With a worried expression, the Kazekage nodded, covered the counter seal with 2 fingers, and made a ram sign with his other hand to prepare. He focused, draping his hand over the seal like a claw. Before long, his hand was glowing a faint blue, signifying intense chakra focus. "Now," he shouted. The seals vanished beneath the Kazekage's touch as he concentrated and his fingertip glowed against it. Jiraiya slammed his fingers into the new seal. As soon as the last remnants of the old seal had disappeared from his skin, the seal instantly blazed from the boy's chest like a blue flame. Only the Sannin's hand held him in place as his head leapt off the table. Only the screaming dead could hear the boy's silent scream, his mouth and eyes wide. Jiraiya was a little relieved that he was at least a little bit closer to finding his godson. As he sat on the couch reflecting on what had happened, the Kazekage was quite happy with the ceiling's outcome. The Kazekage agreed to invest resources in the search for the youths and keep him informed of any developments, no matter how minor. Based on all the information he could provide, the only thing left to do was talk to the Wind Daimyo. New partnerships? The village had been in a state of apathy and paranoia for the past few weeks. The public was perplexed by what had transpired to create the current environment. On a typical day that they believed marked the beginning of the changes that had occurred, some very important members of the village were abruptly taken by Anbu. Some of them were never seen again after being unexpectedly released from custody. Those who did stroll around the village never discussed the incident with either the village or with themselves. Parents whose children attended the ninja academy were abruptly sent home for a week at a time when questioned why. The school's authorities, looking for proof, referred to it as a restructuring program and stated that the staff would not be available until the program was finished. On the plus side, or so they believed, there was a significant drop in the number of grand pranks that were played on the public. They initially believed that this was cause for celebration, probably because they believed that Kyuubi brat had grown up enough to stop such antics. However, as more and more people were being questioned for reasons they couldn't discuss, they began to suspect that the two were related, so they had no reason to celebrate. How accurate they were. Hiruzen had begun an investigation following the initial shock of what had happened to Naruto and Hinata. After a certain amount of time, the majority of the resources were devoted to not finding them but rather identifying the underlying reason why the blonde and those who were trying to harm him did what they did. To date, over 1,500 people have been arrested and questioned about their beliefs, intentions, and behavior in relation to Naruto Uzumaki. They arrested politicians, business owners, academy instructors, and even an elderly woman who used to spend her leisure time simply watering her garden near the market district. Throughout each of these interviews, Inochi Yamanaka had been working steadily. Naruto would walk them through the horrific incident that caused his disappearance if they were plausibly suspected of committing a crime against him. Following such techniques, many people experienced trauma that caused them to speak without filtering. Therefore, if they were exonerated from the investigation, nobody was speaking thus far. 2 council members have been put to death, 4 have been fired, 75% of the academy staff has been replaced, and almost all of the village's markets have been fined, closed, or put to death. Sitting in his office, the man in charge of the village and the turn in events wondered where the rabbit hole ended. It was nothing short of fantastical what the people had done to one boy. Crimes against humanity. The docket included overcharging for merchandise, denying sales without a valid reason, tampering with evidence, conspiracy, attempted murder, sabotage, and his personal nightmare of child mutilation and molestation. At the moment, he was questioning 38 hospital employees. They were only now discovering their crimes. He was so engrossed in his thoughts that he almost toppled over when his door was knocked on. He straightened up quickly and told the guest to come in. As he closed the door, an elderly man entered with a cane. Normally I wouldn't want to see you on a good day, Danzo. What makes you think I would want to see after the last few weeks of continuous bad days? Despite the Hokage's evil demeanor, the bandaged man maintained his composure and did not flinch from the stern stare. The man said, "Enough is enough, Hiruzen," in a chilly tone. "I have let you play this hopeless game of search and destroy long enough. It has only evolved into a witch hunt at this point, with respected adults pointing fingers like children being scolded by a grandparent." The reality of the situation caused the Hokage to sigh when he finally realized the reality. He had grown resentful. He needed a target for his wrath. Once he was able to locate the kids, he also lost his closest confidants when his student and best active shinobi vanished. "Okay. I will play the game. What can I do for you today?" "I could have done more if you had asked sooner," he said in a friendly manner. "I want to help you, but I want you to stop this madness." Hiruzen stared at the individual. "After the staff at the hospital answers for their crimes first, of course I would like a retelling of how a person could conceive the idea of infecting a child with such a variety of diseases that it could spell the start of a plague should the infections take hold." "And what would you have to bring to the table?" the elderly man inquired. Danzo reached into his robe and took out a scroll with a sneer. He added, "Resources for starters, ones that you have explicitly told me to abandon," before throwing it onto the desk in front of him. "Through my contacts I acquired that missive from someone you would be very interested in." Before realizing it bore the Hyuga seal, the Hokage reached for the scroll. He opened it quickly and read what was inside. It was the third time he had read it through before he looked up. Danzo went on, "It is real, but only a copy. The source I have made an extra just for me upon my request," after noticing the inquiries in his competitor's eyes. The new development made Hiruzen's wheels turn. "I can send teams to the area to search for their whereabouts. Now let's say that I already have agents in that area, which I don't. I could send an order and have a faster reaction time," Danzo stated. The man's continuation of the foundation under his nose made Hiruzen want to be furious like everything else. He was ignoring the fact that he was, but in this instance, he was practically ecstatic about the prospect of being able to respond more quickly than an inadvertent competitor to get more information. He would need to summon the Hyuga clan. What would you want in exchange for these specific services? Funding or course off the books if you wouldn't mind, he said, smiling, happy to have what he needed at the right moment to pursue his goals. Money was always at the center. Maintaining the organization has been a difficult undertaking since the man in front of him dissolved the foundation and withdrew all of the funding. By all means, one would assume that he would want more authority, including the title of Hokage. The cripples didn't even dream of this, although he was more powerful than most people realize. He worked best at night. When he was hidden away in the political and ninja worlds, he could broaden his scope if he received funding, and if it was not recorded on ledgers, he would have plausible deniability and the village would never be held accountable in the event that a mission went awry. He re-examined the missive after pausing for a few moments to consider the opportunities and offer that were put before him. He said aloud, "You is close to Kumo as well. I may not have agents there as well, old friend, but if I did I could have them gather some intel for me about possible sightings. A Hyuga in that area would be hard to miss, not to mention sought after given that villages passed, especially with that girl. It would be an opportunity that they couldn't pass up." "Do it, Danzo?" asked Hiruzen. "I want any and all information related to those two on my desk last week. You will get your foundation funding. In exchange I will place it under the funding for the restructuring of the academy." Danzo bowed and said, "How appropriate, old friend," before leaving the office. "Don't make me regret this again, Danzo. I will overlook your operations, but if there is another incident like the one we had with Orochimaru, I will end the program permanently along with you," Hiruzen said before he left. Danzo looked at his leader and noticed a resolve in his eyes that he had not seen in a long time. This man meant business. Yes, he made a mistake when he worked with Orochimaru all those years ago, but he learned from it, just like any respectable man would. He was now working exclusively for Konoha's improvement. Reborn ninja, he would gaze over the ocean and up at the stars from the beach. Here, he would reflect on the series of events that had completely flipped his life upside down. He was contentedly preparing for his final exam to become a shinobi of the greatest village in the world. Just over a month ago at the academy, he would then go on to become the greatest Hokage in history. He is currently sitting on the sand, on an uninhabited island off the coast of a nation that is antagonistic to his own, a daily pursuit by a den of foxes in the name of training added to the bizarre series of events. He turned his head just in time to see the current bane of his life when he heard a faint rustle of the beachside vegetation. A big white fox emerged onto the shore. She left big footprints in the sand with her paws. His unplanned traveling companion was stumbling through the undergrowth directly behind the unnaturally large fox. One of the shyest people he had ever met, Hinata Hyuga, was in his class in the past. She was always silent and fainted whenever he attempted to speak with her. But now that he was staring at her, he couldn't help but blush. He was seeing her in a way he had never seen her before. Her porcelain face was stained with dirt, and her clothes were ripped. Her hair had begun to fall out as a result of her isolation, and he couldn't help but notice her developing into the woman she was rapidly becoming. He was startled out of his reverie when the fox collapsed on the sand beside him. "You both must be the worst excuses of ninja that I have ever seen. Even if you were students, you were abysmal," the fox said when Hinata joined them. "Even the ninja concept that was drilled into your empty skulls is a joke with no punch line," she sighed in frustration. Naruto retorted, "Hey, there is nothing wrong about the way we think, is there?" he asked. Turning to face Hinata, she merely looked at the sandy ground in response to his question. "If you had spent enough time with the she-fox, you would have recognized the guttural sound as a laugh. The trash that you sputter on about is only a small fraction of ninja. But more importantly, what you preaching is ninshu, that is the promotion of understanding others through the use of chakra. The gift of the Sage of Six Paths ninja are the tool that assist in the understanding, but not as you would think. There were no ninja when chakra was gifted. They came later when mankind failed to understand one another. If a group of people couldn't get another group to understand them, then they would use chakra to kill them. It has been your way for hundreds of years." The idea left Hinata's mouth hanging open. Ninjas did kill, but it wasn't for something as insignificant as a quarrel, was it? Chakra was used for personal protection, and if necessary, for the protection of the village or the land. For Naruto, it was a kidney shot. Why would anyone want to be a ninja if the purpose of the job was to kill people simply because you didn't like them? Is that why he was targeted for murder? Could it be that he carried the Kyuubi inside a seal on his body, or was it simply that they didn't understand him? Wouldn't it follow that he shouldn't have been subjected to the kind of torture he endured if the ninshu they learned in class was revered? "Through my mate and me, we will teach you the ways of ninshu and train you to become true ninja." Though the first step is to forget everything you thought you knew. You have potential, as small as it is, but these preconceived notions are holding you back. A ninja kills, maims, sabotages, lies, deceives, seduces, and even rapes to influence their targets. It is never a head-on battle, and always done in the shadow unless the point is to cause fear through knowledge. The fox paused for a moment before going on. Mankind has lost its path and the gifted knowledge by trying to blend these two ideologies together. The only way to reverse the damage of man is to use its own tool to set things right. You too are that tool, Kurama, and I have come to this understanding. We will make you true ninja through and through. You will act in accordance to the teachings of ninja in the pursuit of undoing the fallacies in place. When in a position you can then teach the ninshu of the past for what it truly is meant to be. When Hinata tried to say, "But we can't do all that stuff," what she received in return was the fox snapping its big maw. "You will do it, and then some, child," she snarled. "Remember what was done to you." They forcefully stripped in the open, in front of all those people, them watching in anticipation at the sight of your nakedness. A broken body for them to play with and do as they please. If it had not been for Naruto tapping into my mate's chakra to save you. If they did not kill you right after, it would have been likely that you would have become pregnant with one of your attacker's kids. From there it is also likely that you would have been shunned from family and friend, alone with a bastard child. The girl's eyes were full of tears and confirmation, which the fox could see clearly. Count yourself fortunate, child. What you narrowly escaped happens all around the continent to other females. Even as we speak, some die, some left to a fate worse than death. Does that sound like the teachings of Ninshu? Or even the fantasized ideology of what you were taught in the academy? Hinata shook her head slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks and onto the sand. "No," she said in a whisper. "If a ninja is to be heard, then make sure they can hear you," the vixen retorted. "Speak with conviction, child." "No," Hinata yelled, gathering all of her mental strength to look the fox in the eyes. "Naruto, container of my mate," she said, turning her big head in his direction. "If the treatment of you has not been enough to realize the corruption of the man's ways of life, then nothing will. It was not the teachings of Ninshu that allowed your tortures to take place. Was it compassion to tear you limb from limb? Or was it the understanding of fellow man to starve you intentionally? Or could it have been the compassionate bond of mankind that left your only friend here in a state where another person would have buried himself deep inside her?" That final question made him growl in his throat. She had finally reached them, and they realized how abhorrent the current system was. Forced understanding was what it was for land and wealth. They killed one another, and those who survived had to accept the victor or face annihilation themselves. "You're right," he said instead. "The system is broken, and it is incorrect. Why do we use chakra to harm and kill people if it is a gift that allows us to do such wonderful things?" He bowed deeply to the fox and said, "Teach me Ninshu, so I know the right way. I may not know the way right now, but I know I have to get stronger to do something about it, to erase the old way. Teach me to be a true ninja." "Then welcome to the Kitsune clan," the fox said, turning to face the girl, who nodded before bowing. It was storm season again on the island, and clouds were seen gathering over the ocean in the distance. A lone man looked out over the water to the west, and he could not bring himself to feel homesick for the place that had been his home for more years than he had been gone. When his father died, it ceased to be his home and simply became his village, where he served and would probably die doing so. When his sensei died in service, he lost touch with the place as a village and remained there for no other reason than familiarity. He was still serving, but his heart was no longer there. Once he learned of the betrayal, he could not stand to be inside those walls for a second longer, and the feeling persisted for the rest of his years. He walked along the beach, checking the trap lines for fish that would be his dinner tonight, and probably tomorrow if the storm did not pass by then. He pulled the fish that were on the hooks and put them in a satchel before throwing the reinforced lines back into the water and headed to his small but comfortable hut. The building appeared more livable than when he first arrived. With the roof no longer leaking and the walls completely repaired, there was a small campfire in front of the building, and as he got closer, he could see someone sitting next to it, tending to the embers, stoking them in preparation for cooking the fresh fish. In retrospect, it was surprising that someone washed up on shore just over 8 months ago. She had been severely injured and severely dehydrated. He attended to her while she was unconscious, treated her wounds, and was ready to send her off the island as soon as she was able to travel. The long, dark hair was draped down the back, with a few senbon needles holding a small bun in place at the top of the head turned toward him. She was sluggish and uninterested in any external stimulation when she woke up as her injuries healed. It took her a week and a half before she finally spoke, beginning one morning with a string of cries, and by mid-afternoon, she had finally described what had happened before she washed up on the island's shores. The last thing his visitor remembered was the conclusion of a final battle between her master, herself, and the Konoha team. To his surprise, she and her master, the missing nin Zabuza Mamashi, had been hired by the business tycoon Gato to kill a bridge builder and aid in the takeover in a village in the Land of Waves, which just so happened to be the same village he had passed through before arriving on the island himself. The village had hired a team from Konoha to protect the builder and the bridge until construction was finished, and he could tell from the story that it was a genin team. From the description, the leader of the genin team had been an old comrade of his, Asuma, the son of the Hokage. Her master was in an all-out battle with the Junin leader, what she saw to the defeat of 3 genin. Before she was overwhelmed by the teamwork of her opponents, the last she saw of Zabuza was at the opposing side of the bridge. Asuma and Zabuza were in rough shape, Zabuza more so as he was panting heavily with knife wounds across his body and a pool of blood forming at his feet. Exhausted and low on chakra herself, she tried to make it to her master in his defense, but in a last-ditch effort Zabuza used whatever remaining chakra he could muster in the hopes of defeating his opponent. As the jutsu was released, a wave of water hit the bridge with the force of a hurricane. Her already tired and beaten body was thrashed about as she was swept up and washed out of the village harbor. She didn't know how or when, but as she woke next she was already adrift at sea, no land in sight, and still feeling the chakra exhaustion and pain from her battle. Somehow she had ended up floating on some wreckage, likely construction materials from the bridge. Fate was cruel as it had not allowed her to die as she had planned, a tool used successfully by her master in the pursuit of his dreams. She began to speak more freely a few days after her story, and she eventually made the decision to talk to the one-eyed man. She asked him in a deep, contemplative tone, "What purpose do I have now that I am a failure in my beliefs?" To her astonishment, when the man named Kakashi spoke to her, he didn't answer with the kind of profound wisdom that comes from someone who has lived a long life, even a shinobi. "I don't know," was all he said. Then she realized that this man who had been caring for her and healing her wounds was just as broken as she was, and that his smile, which was out of character for him normally, was the result of what had happened 2 months prior. The first 6 months had gone by like any other day he had had since coming to the island, waking up as the light came on and he began his day, eating some fruit he had picked from the surrounding area before washing up, and then going down to the beach to undergo his katas as a means of keeping himself in some sort of shape, not because he needed it, but more out of habit from his time serving his former village. After that he would exercise some and run along the sandy beach. After washing up once more he would tend to the task that needed to be completed for the day. Sometimes it was to tend to his shelter, repairs, or it could have been just to walk through the surrounding forests on the outskirts of the village in the search of fruit or edible vegetation. On a few occasions he would happen across some animal in which he would hunt and kill as a means to vary his diet that typically consisted of fish. Haku would watch him more often than not, and would attend to her own devices when he was away from their shared dwelling. He had grown accustomed to her presence, and had totally abandoned the idea of sending her off the island. She had been a great distraction from his inner thoughts and musings from his past. She had taken it upon herself, as a way of repayment, to cook whatever was caught or found. She would clean their clothes and home, and would find new clothing from around the island with the understanding that she was to never enter the old village of Uzu. 2 months ago, after they had finished their meal and conversation, they sat around the fire in silence. Kakashi had taken to watching the stars at night, and he occasionally saw a shooting star, but this time, the stars were boring and just moved across the night sky. Haku stood up abruptly, and Kakashi saw, out of the corner of his eye, that she was stretching. He took this as a sign that it was getting close to the time when they would extinguish the fire and go to bed as usual. He stood up shortly after her and stretched too, not realizing that she was approaching him. By the time he relaxed and felt his muscles relax, she was in front of him, and before he could question her closeness, she had already reached up, lowered his mask, and kissed him hard on the lips. He offered the young woman the fish he had caught, and as the memory dwindled, Haku reached up from her seat and took them gratefully. Kakashi sat down next to her, and even though she was over 10 years younger than he was, she had been willing to share her body with him. It was an unexpected turn of events, but it was something he was grateful for, something he didn't regret at all. They had sex that first night and many more over the course of the last 2 months. It was a slow process, but one that was healing them both, and they were gradually becoming closer to one another. Kumogakure. He was a Sannin, a ninja with such unbridled power. The title had only been given to 2 others throughout memorable history. He had trekked across the entire elemental nations in search of his godson or his companion, and occasionally he found himself begging or asking for help in the most unlikely places. He was supposed to be stronger than any Kage in service at this time, and despite all of his accolades, he was more than willing to bribe, pay, steal, beg, and kill for any information that would help him find his godson, especially since his home village had done that to the boy while he lived there. His former sensei gave him a reliable lead after he had fixed the seal on the Kage's son and met with the Wind Daimyo on the Kage's behalf. Apparently, Naruto's traveling companion was resourceful and had used her family's position to deceive a resort in Yu Nounkuni, where they had stayed for a short while before departing again with new clothes and ninja tools. He proceeded slowly and methodically across the nations once more, stopping in towns and villages along the way to ask for more information on the children's potential whereabouts in case they were coming his way. It had taken him longer than he had expected to reach Yu Nounkuni and the resort, but at least he had felt thorough. As he arrived at the resort, the attendant verified that his description of the children was accurate, and he was certain that they had stopped there. Further research revealed that the two had departed from the east side of the resort village and ventured into the wilderness. To his utter dismay, he also discovered that the Hyuga clan was also on the same trail. They had a larger lead than he did, and it would be disastrous if they discovered them before him. He vowed to himself as he resumed the trail that if the Hyuga found the children and injured them, the Uchiha massacre would undoubtedly occur. Now he found himself on the eastern side of Kumogakure, having left the village a short time ago. He spent more than a month within that village trying to attain information of the two's whereabouts. Given the relationship between Kumo and Konoha, he tried to do it inconspicuously at first. He made it a full week in the village before the Hokage found out he was there at all. When he met with the beast of a man, he held nothing back. He questioned and insinuated just as much as the Kage did. Although boisterous and loud, the Hokage would still be wary of attacking a Sannin, even if he was in his own village. Once all the accusations were thrown and the truth of the matter came out, they had a very tense conversation. Even during the meeting, the Hokage had openly admitted to green-lighting the Hyuga incident that happened nearly 10 years ago. He didn't apologize or make excuses. To him, that was the way the world worked. Every nation sought resources and talent wherever they could get them. He even admitted he would still love to have the Byakugan in his village, but sadly he did not have the young girl that was traveling with his godson. Jiraiya was shocked to learn that the information department was offering her at least some assistance after she recounted the story and the reason he was there. The Hokage even agreed to give her some important mission reports that had been turned in months earlier, which were dubious and intriguing. The Hokage claimed to sympathize with his situation, stating that he clearly had an adopted brother who was also a Jinchuriki. Although they were not shunned because of the protection of the Hokage's title, there were a few instances of shaming and infrequently mistreated their other Jinchuriki until she began to stand up for herself, with the Hokage's assistance once he learned of it. With those offered reports, Jiraiya was finally feeling like he was ahead of the game, and leaps and bounds ahead of the Hyuga. After all, the Hyuga would never dare set foot within a large radius of Kumo, in fear that if they were discovered they would be killed on sight or captured to have their eyes removed. In the reports there were some that stood out. One in particular was a mission detail report of a patrol team. Evidently the patrol team had failed to report in on schedule, so an inquiry team was dispatched. The missing team was found, but they were not in a position or capacity to divulge much information. The scene was a bloodbath. Body parts littered the cliff area that the team was found in. There were 2 confirmed dead bodies and a third that had been found alive but mutilated. After some time in the intensive care unit of the hospital to stabilize him, he was forced awake through adrenaline injection. The man could not see due to the deep gashes that crossed his face and destroyed his eyes, but he could recognize the demanding voice of his Kage when questioned. The man blabbered on about a demon child, stating that a kid was chewing and gnawing on his arm. It was likely a phantom pain brought on by the loss of that arm, although it looked as if a large animal had bit down on it and chomped it completely in half. In his incoherent rambling there was a regretful apology from him about failing to bring back the Hyuga girl. The man had died during his squabbling due to heart failure and blood loss. No further incidents like that occurred after, so it was written off as an anomaly. The second report at least gave the sage a destination to look forward to. 2 nights after the last report there was a theft report in a small outlying village along the southeastern coast of the nation. This normally wouldn't have been noted as nothing but simple thievery to most, but to the trained spymaster, he knew there were no such things as coincidences. The village just so happened to be below the rocky cliff trail that the Kumo patrol had been found. It was likely that the children had been spotted by a patrol and Naruto had tapped into the fox's chakra once again. In an attempt to leave the area as quickly as possible, they had stayed hidden until they recovered and stolen a small boat. The only question is where they went from there. There was the East Ocean beyond the high mountainous cliffs of Kumo. A lot of that was largely unexplored and dangerous. If they continued south they would be near the same predicament. It was nearly as dangerous, and all that was out there was small islands, almost likely uninhabited. The signs of human life don't start until you started to get closer to Kiri. The Hokage himself gave him the information, but Jiraiya still spent more time in the village because he needed to confirm it or see if he could find any more leads that might have recently surfaced. For the next 3 weeks, he asked questions in markets, parks, bars, and anywhere else he could find a crowd of people. The looser the lips, the better. However, the constant Kumo ninja that followed him around the village while he asked questions for the two kids occasionally hindered his efforts. The Hokage gave him this one pass in the village, but it did not mean that she was completely trusted. He was standing in the same village where he thought the children had left, and he was frowning deeply as he thought about how he was going to find them now. His service with Konoha had focused on the lands of the elemental nations, and he had no idea of the hundreds of islands that dotted the ocean between here and Kiri. Knowing how close he was infuriated him to no end, because if they were lucky, and Naruto seemed to have plenty of luck given his history of surviving, they made it to at least one of those islands, if not Kiri altogether. But he couldn't just run across the water without a proper layout of those islands and hope to have enough chakra to make it. Before slamming his hand onto the sandy beach, he made a series of hand signals in the hopes that the locals wouldn't freak out. The area was soon engulfed in a dense cloud of smoke, and as it started to dissipate, the Sannin only hoped that the backlash of his actions and inactions wouldn't be too harsh. "Jiraiya!" a voice yelled. He quickly stomped his foot down from his position, and after the smoke cleared, he was visible on top of a gigantic toad. "Will you stop talking, Bunta?" The toad head's complaining was too much for him to handle at the moment, so he yelled back. "I told you to never summon me near salt water, because it makes me itch," Bunta said angrily. The sage replied, "Stuff it, Bunta, we have an emergency." "I see no enemies," the toad said, quickly turning his head and scanning his surroundings. "This must be important because you're at a loss," he complained. When the enormous creature leaned closer, Jiraiya jumped down from the toad's head and landed on the beach to observe it as it spoke. "Do you remember your last summoner?" The toad's throat made a vibrating noise that might have been a hum. "Minato Namikaze, the girly man. He had died, and it was a huge loss. I hope the Shinigami's stomach gives him some rest. His child is lost in this world right now." Although the toad in front of him had only told him a portion of the story while he was there, the toad's words made the Sannin more proud than he could have been if the Yondaime had been his real son. The toad sage dropped his head at the memory of hearing that news. Minato had called him to slow down the Kyuubi, and after a while he reappeared on his head with a small human boy in his arms and teleported the four of them away from the village. The rest was history because he was not there long before being released and sent back to his realm once more. The toad boss snarled a little at the thought, remembering the night as if it were happening then. When the man shook his head in relief, the toad said, "You know we cannot search the entire elemental nations for a single kid." It was an accusation that struck the man right where it hurt the most. Jiraiya shook his head once more. "He's out there," he said, gesturing across the ocean. "There are probably more than 100 islands out there. Even if I could look through them all, I wouldn't know where to begin." His enormous eyes narrowed as he said, "But even if we could search all those islands, finding the chakra of a single child is nearly impossible." "You're not trying to find a single child's chakra. I have reason to believe that the seal that Minato placed on his son has weakened." The toad's head abruptly snapped down to him in surprise. "I want you to look for the chakra of the Kyuubi. He is said to have tapped into the fox's demonic chakra on multiple occasions." He shuddered in response, as if he had forgotten his manners around Shima-sama. After giving the matter a lot of thought, he glanced back and forth between the man in front of him and the sea. 2 days, Jiraiya," he said, grunting once before turning to face their renowned sage. His summoner's expression was one of relief, and he cleared his throat to remove that expression before continuing. 2 days and I will have any information of him being on any of those islands. But," he paused to glare at Jiraiya, "both you and that village were responsible for him. There are concerns about being so far from Konoha and so far into hostile territory at such a young age. Shima-sama will probably prefer that you respond to her directly." "Thank you, Gamabunta." He bowed deeply at the waist, nodding his head in gratitude. He was prepared to do anything to get the boy back, even if it meant sitting in front of the toad matriarch and telling her about all his shortcomings while waiting for her to judge him. At the conclusion of the second day, "Call me back. Go ahead and clean yourself up," the toad grunted. "You look like your former teammate after a week-long bender." Without waiting for a response, the enormous toad vanished in yet another plume of smoke, leaving the sage by herself once more. A sigh of relief escaped his lips as he glanced at his clothes and realized that the toad was right, he needed a good meal and a hot bath. A long night's sleep couldn't hurt either, the two things would probably help him feel better, but he wasn't sure if he could sleep, and being this close to the end of his journey was likely to keep him awake, with questions about his first encounter with his godson running through his head. He just hoped his instincts were right and that the child and his companion were still alive and surviving. He turned back toward the small local village, hoping to find a place to stay for the next 2 days. The island. Hurry, Naruto-kun, Hinata cried, her voice full of desperation. They were trying to hide from the giant fox, and heavy breathing could be heard all around them. If they were caught, the punishment could be unbearable. She looked at the dimly lit cave walls in front of her and to the sides, but that was not what she was worried about at the moment. Instead, her body shook violently, and she dropped her head. She was grateful for the fur pallet beneath her, or else her knees and elbows would be digging painfully into the stone cave floor. The pale-eyed girl was trying desperately to pull him closer to her, but he was so deep that she could feel him pushing further and deeper into her. Naruto was behind her, his hands gripping her nude hips and pulling her back into his lap as he pushed further inside. Every time he sat her alone, she felt a wave of ecstasy pass through her, and if she didn't know any better, she would swear that he was trying to crawl into her young womb in order to get her. She had freely given him her heart through his actions and deeds when she was growing up, and he had also claimed her soul in the nightmare of the day they left Konoha and he saved her life. It was spring on the island again, and this time the pull was unbearable for the two of them. The first spring they had experienced was unpleasant and uneasy, and the giant fox that had been training them for more than a year had intervened and kept them apart this year. However, there was no doubting it. As she and Naruto were informed, the mark that now covered her left budding breast indicated a sexual possession of the two of them. They would be drawn together instinctively at all times, and during the fox's mating season, the spring, the pull would be nearly irresistible. It was only on the third night that Naruto managed to sneak past the huge fox that protected her. During this time, when their eyes met, she saw the feral possessive side of him, which excited her even more than she already was, and when he lunged at her, she was more than happy and willing to be taken by him. The first 2 nights that they were apart, she almost walked herself into the ground, pacing back and forth like a drug addict forced into a detox program. Hinata gasped as she felt him grab one of her breasts and squeeze it tightly, massaging it roughly as he pounded into her from behind. Her skin was so sensitive to everything about him that she could feel the tiny droplets of sweat when they trailed off his face and landed on her back. 2 weeks have passed since that first time, and she still couldn't get enough of him being so deep inside of her. The sounds they made turned her on even more. Orgasms came quickly, rocking their bodies and producing grunts, squeals, and howls of pleasure. Without warning, he pulled himself from her and she left a gasp escape her mouth. She could feel the combined fluids of him and her leaking out of her and start running down her inner thigh. Before she knew it, she was turned over onto her back and he again pushed himself inside. It didn't matter the position or how gentle or rough he was, everything he did to her excited her. Even though he could now see her face in the dim light of the moon, she was sure she looked disheveled and worn by now. She could be more excited. Now she could clearly see his bright blonde hair and lust half-lidded blue eyes, and they peered at each other. He began to quickly move again, pants and whimpers to the sensation of his hard cock sliding in and out of her escaped her lips. His legs instinctively wrapped around his waist as her arms snaked their way around his neck. Quickly he leaned forward and kissed her deeply, tongues invading each other's space. Like this, she could feel his pubic area rubbing against her clit as well as his developing chest rubbing against her aching breasts. It only furthered her excitement and brought her closer to another release. Her breaths were getting more and more ragged, so Naruto opened her mouth and began to kiss and suck on her neck as he reached up and grabbed one of her breasts with his powerful hands. Then, as she orgasmed around his throbbing dick, her back arched, pressing her chest and toned abs harder against him. He quickly picked up the pace and slammed into her with fervor during her climax to join her, and after just a few more pumps into her tight constricting walls, he growled and moaned as he released himself in her again. Though he was still stiff inside her, Hinata gently rolled them both onto their sides, and he nuzzled closer to her and started rubbing one of his hands up and down her now exposed back. After they were both spent and sweaty, the intimate embrace they shared was the culmination of their deep-seated feelings and attraction to one another. Hinata felt his weight drop onto her and knew he was spent, so she wrapped her arms around his back and pulled him closer to her, showing him as much love and care as she could. "I love you, Hinata-chan," Naruto said, kissing her cheek. She kissed his cheek tenderly, feeling the tingling sensation of the contact on her lips, and said, "I love you" to Naruto-kun. Despite what they had just done, This was the most intimate and passionate moment for them. The afterglow gave her a warmth that she knew deep down could never be replaced by anyone or anything. After taking a deep breath, the young man tightened his grip on her and said, "I know it is the mark that is bringing us together right now, Hinata-chan." He shuddered and went on, "But I don't want you to think that's the only reason I'm with you when this season is over. Will you still want to be with me?" With hesitation, he asked. The question made Hinata want to laugh, but she held back because she was afraid Naruto might feel offended or rejected if she did. "I have loved you much longer than the time you placed this mark on me," Hinata said, returning the hug with all the warmth she could muster. "I never wanted to be apart from you, which is why I followed you." She raised his head to meet his eyes and said, "The mark is just a side thought to me, Naruto-kun. Never doubt that I want to be with you," she concluded, allowing him to see the sincerity in her eyes. He kissed her on the lips and then swallowed. "Do you think you'll want to do this?" he asked. Looking down between their nude bodies where they were joined, he was gradually becoming softer inside her, but he could still feel every movement they made as her walls tightened around him, sending a little surge of pleasure between them, even after this mating season is over. She did giggle a little at that. Kami, she hoped so, and she had never felt more loved or cherished while they were joined together making love. Naruto was a fantastic lover, not that she could compare, but she had the distinct idea that no one was better than him. She felt sexy under his gaze, loved by his lips, and appreciated at his touch. He devoured her body with his hands and tongue, becoming complete when he reached the deep recesses of her, stroking the sensitive flesh of her womanhood. At 14, they were still a little too young to be enjoying such carnal pleasures, but she couldn't care less what people would think if they ever found out, if they ever left the remote island, that is. Yes, she would allow him to claim her body repeatedly if he so desired. She could never get enough of feeling his skin against hers. The only thing she was afraid of at the moment was the possibility of having children. She knew that there was a good chance that it would happen because, in the final 3 hours of their lovemaking, he had orgasmed almost 6 times, and she felt full in her nether regions. She wasn't complaining, though, because she had more than tripled that number with her own climaxes, some minor, some earth-shattering. "As long as you will have me, I will always want you, Naruto-kun," she replied, blushing slightly at the idea of having sex once more, already sensing the ghostly movements of him slipping in her repeatedly, before kissing him once more. She was surprised when he kissed her back more forcefully than she had expected, but she accepted it nonetheless. During the heated makeout session, their hands started to roam each other's nude bodies once more, and before they could engage in another round of passion, they both froze. They heard the faintest of footsteps approaching the cave opening they had claimed for their lovers' meeting, and as the noise approached, they quickly separated from one another, and soon they were on their knees with their heads bowed low in respect and shamiya, not for what they had done, but rather for being discovered by the creature that had found them. As the musty, sex-filled air of the cave entered its nostrils, a giant maw with sharp canines sticking out of its upper lips first appeared in the small cave. You could almost hear the sneer of derision in the sound as it snorted. "Hinata, Naruto, you both disobeyed me once again," the fox yelled at the two in front of them. "You know you are not supposed to be together during this time," causing their frames to shake and the cave walls to reverberate. They both said, "We are sorry," Bayako-sama, simultaneously. Even with his head lowered, Naruto couldn't help but snicker and smile when the fox yelled, "Do not lie to me, boy. I can smell the musk of your mating and copulation from more than 100 yards of this cave." "Hinata," said the giant white fox, looking at the girl, who stayed on her knees but straightened up to sit so the fox could speak to her. The fox looked at the young woman's nude body, noting her growing breasts and the trail of their mixed fluids escaping the girl's swollen womanhood. "You will leave this place now and find that root, consume it and return here immediately after," the fox said, snorting again at the intrusive odor. She had been looking for and eating the root, a herbal remedy that prevented pregnancy, every day for the past 2 weeks, ever since Naruto had taken her virginity. It tasted awful and frequently left an aftertaste in her mouth that lasted for a few hours, but she would gladly eat the root if it meant that she could be with Naruto. She got up and bowed to the fox once more, saying, "Thank you, Bayako-sama." She hurried out of the cave without even bothering to get any clothes, since they were the only 2 people on the island and the foxes that ruled the lands didn't care about her modesty. After watching the girl go, the fox turned to face the boy in front of her and said, "Naruto, stand." The boy obeyed, and the fox narrowed its eyes at him. Since they arrived on the island, the squat 12-year-old boy had undergone extensive training. Lean muscle had taken the place of the baby fat, and a natural diet limited by the island's resources had filled him out. If she had been human, she would have been able to appreciate the figure standing tall in front of her, even though his still erect and engorged penis was ready from his previous activities. After huffing, she sat down and let her tail waggle behind her in a natural way. "The end is coming near, Naruto," she began, and he gave her a perplexed look. "In about a week's time we will be leaving this island," she concluded, hoping he would finally get it. He was stronger. He could run faster, avoid detection, cover his tracks, and climb as if he belonged in the trees. He and Hinata were safe here, and wherever they were together and safe would be his home. But why do we have to leave Byako-sama? He, for his part, felt his stomach sink. They had lived here for more than a year, and he had never been happier in his life. He came back. "My mate and I have taught you the true path of ninju, while I have taught you how to hunt, kill, and survive. Since you kids arrived on the island, we can't teach you anything more from our house here. If we stayed here, you and your partner would probably become less capable and never be able to make amends for the wrongs that the false teachings of ninju have caused in the world." Naruto nodded his head, looking at the white fox again, and said, "I'm sorry for questioning you. Byako-sama, you were right." He had learned all of that and more, and he had promised Kurama and Byako that they would make right what the great sage had intended. They had learned the lessons by heart. The training had become instinctive, and they knew what needed to be done. Experience is what we lack, and it cannot be acquired here. The fox gave them the best impression of a smile as it looked at their hope. Yes, they needed experience, and everything she said was absolutely true. She also knew that there had to be a way to free Kurama without killing the boy because, as time went on, she had started to care for the two as if they were her own kids, especially Hinata. She only agreed to not kill the boy in order to free her mate because Kurama had ordered it, but she never intended to become as attached as she has with them. She nodded and stood again, but as she was leaving the cave entrance, she paused to look back at the young man. "You may take this final week off from training, Naruto. Hinata will get relieved as well from her training," she said. The boy blushed brightly at her statement. "But you two may do as you please for the remainder of our time here, as long as she continues to eat from those roots once a day until this mating season is over." She paused to gather her thoughts for a moment before continuing. "I may have kept you separated during this mating cycle in spite. After all, I have wants and needs during this time as well, and I cannot be with my mate physically. After all, I don't feel like I'll be this clan's grand matriarch anytime soon." "Oh," he began as she was leaving the cave, "how are you going to travel with us?" He nodded to her, demonstrating his understanding and excitement that they would no longer need to sneak around. "Given that you're such a huge fox, it would be challenging, wouldn't it? Cause a lot of alarms when we got to the mainland." The question halted the fox in her tracks. She had already considered that, but had not yet come up with a solution. She grimaced, keeping her face hidden from the boy, and said, "I will figure something out." Then, she leapt off through the nearby forests, lost in thought.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.